treatise of psychology. Revolutionary Christmas message from 1975 to 1976. Samael Aun Weor, Buddha Maitreya Kakavavatara of the New Age of Aquarius. To preface this treatise on revolutionary psychology is a new message that the Master gives to the brothers on the occasion of Christmas 1975. It is a complete code that teaches us to kill defects. Until now, the student body is content with repressing defects, something like the military leader who imposes himself on his subordinates. Personally, we have been experts in repressing defects, but the time has come when we are forced to kill them, to eliminate them, using the technique of Master Samael Aun in a clear, precise and exact when the defects die. In addition to the soul expressing itself with its immaculate beauty, everything changes for us. Many ask how we do when several defects emerge at the same time, and we answer to them that they eliminate some and let the others wait. Those others can be repressed to later. In the first chapter, it teaches us how to turn the page of our life, break anger, greed, envy, lust, pride, laziness, gluttony, desire, etc. It is essential to dominate the earthly mind and make the frontal vortex rotate so that it absorbs the eternal knowledge of the universal mind. In this same chapter it teaches us to examine the moral level of being and change this level. This is possible when we destroy our defects. Every internal change results in an external change. The level of being that the Master deals with 3. In this work it refers to the condition in which we find ourselves. In the second chapter, explains that the level of being is the step where we find ourselves located on the scale of life. When we climb this scale then we progress, but when we remain stationary it produces boredom, reluctance, sadness, heaviness. In the third chapter, it tells us about psychological rebellion and teaches us that the psychological starting point is within us and tells us that the vertical or perpendicular path is the field of the rebels, of those who seek immediate changes, in such a way that the work on oneself it is the main characteristic of the vertical path. Humanoids walk the horizontal path on the scale of life. In the fourth chapter, determines how changes occur. The beauty of a child is due to the fact of not having developed its defects, and we see that as these develop in the child, it loses its innate beauty. When we disintegrate the defects, the soul manifests itself in its splendor, and this is perceived by people with the naked eye. Furthermore, the beauty of the soul is what beautifies the physical body. In the fifth chapter, this psychological gym teaches us how to handle it, and teaches us the method to annihilate the secret ugliness that we carry inside, the defects. It teaches us to work on ourselves, to achieve a radical transformation. 4. Change is necessary, but people do not know how to change. They suffer a lot and are content to blame others. They do not know that only they are responsible for managing their lives. In the sixth chapter, it tells us about life. It tells us that life is a problem that no one understands. States are interior and events are exterior. In the seventh chapter, it tells us about the interior states, and teaches us the difference that exists between the states of consciousness and the external events of practical life. When we modify the wrong states of consciousness, this causes fundamental changes in us. He speaks to us in the 9th chapter about personal events, and teaches us to correct wrong psychological states and erroneous interior states. It teaches us to put order in our disordered interior house. Interior life brings exterior circumstances, and if these are painful they are due to absurd interior states. The exterior is the reflection of the interior. The interior change immediately causes a new order of things. The wrong internal states turn us into defenseless victims of human perversity. It teaches us not to identify with any event, reminding us that everything passes. We must learn to see life as a movie, and in the drama we must be observers, not confuse ourselves with the drama. 5. One of my sons has a theater where modern films are shown, and it fills up when artists who have won Oscars work. One day my son Alvaro invited me to a movie where artists with Oscar winners worked. To the invitation I replied that I couldn't attend because I was interested in a better human drama than the one in his movie, where all the artists were Oscar winners. He asked me, "What is that drama?" And I answered him, "The drama of life." He continued, "But we all work in that drama," and I told him, "I work as an observer of that drama." Because, I responded, because I don't get confused with the drama, I do what I have to do. I don't get excited or sad with the events of the drama. In the 10th chapter, he talks to us about the different selves and explains to us that in the inner life of people there is no harmonious work because it is a sum of selves, which is why there are so many changes in the daily life of each of the actors in the drama. Jealousy, laughter, crying, anger, fear. These characteristics show us the varied changes and alterations to which the ego is due in chapter 11. He tells us about our beloved ego and tells us that selves are psychic values, whether positive or negative, and teaches us the practice of inner self-observation, and thus we discover many selves that live within our personality. In Chapter 12, he tells us about radical change. There he teaches us that no change is possible 6 in our psyche without direct observation of the whole set of subjective factors that we carry inside. When we learn that we are not one but many within us, we go on the path of self-knowledge. Knowledge and understanding are different. The first is from the mind and the second is from the heart. Chapter 13. Observer and observed. There he speaks to us of the athlete of internal self-observation, who is one who seriously works on himself and strives to remove the undesirable elements that we carry inside. For self-knowledge we must divide ourselves into observer and observed. Without this division we could never reach self-knowledge. In Chapter 14, it tells us about negative thoughts, and we see that all selves have intelligence and use our intellectual center to launch concepts, ideas, analysis, etc., which indicates that we do not have an individual mind. We see in this chapter that selves abuse our thinking center. In Chapter 15, it tells us about individuality. There one realizes that we have no consciousness or self-will, or individuality. Through intimate self-observation we can see the people who live in our psyche, the selves, and that we must eliminate to achieve transformation. Radical. Since individuality is sacred, we see the case of school teachers who live correct and 7 children all their lives and thus reach decrepitude because they also got confused with the drama of life. The remaining chapters from 16 to 32 are very interesting for all those people who want to get out of the crowd, for those who aspire to be something in life, for the haughty eagles, for the revolutionaries of conscience and indomitable spirit, for those who renounce to the rubber backbone, who bow their necks before the whip of any tyrant. Chapter 16. The Master tells us about the Book of Life. It is convenient to observe the repetition of daily words, the recurrence of things from the same day. All of this leads us to high knowledge. In Chapter 17, he talks to us about mechanical creatures and tells us that when one does not observe oneself, one cannot realize the incessant daily repetition. Those who do not wish to observe themselves do not wish to work to achieve a true radical transformation. Our personality is just a puppet, a talking doll, something mechanical. We are repeaters of events. Our habits are the same. We have never wanted to change them. Chapter 18. It is about the supersubstantial bread. Habits keep us petrified. We are mechanical people loaded with old habits. We must provoke internal changes. Self-observation is essential. Chapter 19 tells us about the good owner of the house. We must isolate ourselves from the drama of life. We must defend the escape of the psyche. This work 8 against life. It is something very different from daily life. As long as one does not change internally, one will always be a victim of circumstances. The good homeowner is the one who swims against the current. Those who do not want to let themselves be devoured by life or vary. In Chapter 20, he tells us about the two worlds, and tells us that the true knowledge that can really originate in us a fundamental inner change, is based on direct self-observation of oneself. Inner self-observation is a means to change intimately. Through self-observation of ourselves, we learn to walk the inner path. The sense of self-observation of oneself is atrophied in the human race, but this sense develops when we persevere in self-observation of oneself. Just as we learn to walk in the outside world, so also through psychological work on itself we learn to walk in the inner world. In Chapter 21, he tells us about self-observation. He tells us that self-observation is a practical method to achieve a radical transformation. Knowing is never observing. Knowing should not be confused with observing. Self-observation is 100% active. It is a means of self-change, while knowing that it is passive is not. Dynamic attention comes from the observing side, while thoughts and emotions belong to the observed side. Knowing is 9 something completely mechanical, passive. On the other hand, self-observation is a conscious act. In Chapter 22, he tells us about the talk, and tells us to verify, that is, talk to ourselves. It is harmful, because they are ourselves facing each other. When you find yourself talking to yourself, observe yourself and you will discover the nonsense you are committing. In Chapter 23, it tells us about the world of relationships, and tells us that there are 3 states of relationships: obligatory with our own body, with the outside world, and the relationship of man with himself, which is not important for most people. To people he is only interested in the first 2 types of relationships. We must study to know which of these 3 types we are at fault with. The lack of internal elimination means that we are not related to ourselves, and this causes us to remain in darkness. When you find yourself dejected, disoriented, confused, remember yourself, and this will cause the cells of your body to receive a different breath. In Chapter 24, It tells us about the psychological song. It tells us about the rants, self-defense, feeling persecuted, etc. Believing that others are to blame for everything that happens to us. On the other hand, we take the triumphs as our own work, so we will never be able to improve ourselves. Man bottled up in the concepts he generates can become useful or useless. This is not the way to observe and improve ourselves. Learning to forgive is essential for our inner improvement. The law of mercy is more 10 higher than the law of the violent man. Eye by eye, tooth by tooth. Gnosis is intended for those sincere aspirants who truly want to work and change, each one singing their own psychological song. The sad memory of things we experience tie us to the past and do not allow us to live in the present, which disfigures us. To move to a higher level, it is essential to stop being what you are. For each of us there are higher levels to which we must climb. In chapter 25, he tells us about return and recurrence and tells us that Gnosis is transformation, renewal, incessant improvement. He who does not want to improve himself, transform himself, wastes his time because in addition to not moving forward, he stays on the path of regression and therefore becomes incapable of knowing himself. The VN rightly asserts that we are puppets repeating the scenes of life. When we reflect on these facts, we realize that we are artists who work for nothing in the drama of daily life. When we have the power to watch ourselves, to observe what our physical body does and executes, we place ourselves on the path of conscious self-observation and observe that one thing is consciousness, which knows, and another thing is what executes and obeys. That is, our own body. The comedy of life is hard and cruel with those who do not know how to light the internal fires. They are consumed within their own labyrinth in the midst of the deepest darkness. Ourselves lie pleasantly in the darkness. 11. In chapter 26, he tells us about childhood self-awareness. He says that when the child is born, the essence is reincorporated. This gives the child beauty. Then as the personality develops, the selves that come from past lives are reincorporated and the natural beauty is lost. In chapter 27, it is about the publican and the Pharisee. It says that everyone rests on something of what they have, hence everyone's desire to have something. Titles, property, money, fame, social position, etc. The man and woman inflated with pride are the ones who need the needy most to live. The man rests only on external bases. He is also an invalid because the day he loses those bases he will become the unhappiest man in the world. When we feel older than others, we are fattening ourselves and thereby refusing to become blessed. For esoteric work, our own praises are obstacles that oppose all spiritual progress. When we observe ourselves, we can cover the bases on which we rest. We must pay close attention to the things that offend or hurt us so we discover the psychological bases on which ones we find. On this path of improvement, those who believe themselves superior to others stagnate or regress. In the initiatory process of my life, a great change occurred when, afflicted by thousands of hardships, disappointments and misfortunes, I took the outcast course in my home, abandoning the pose of I am the one who gives everything for this home, to feeling like a sad beggar. 12. In my life, because I was offered breakfast, lunch and dinner, clean clothes and the right to sleep in the same bed as my patron, the priest's wife, but this only lasted days because the home could not tolerate that attitude or warrior tactic. We must learn to transform evil into good, darkness into light, hate into love, etc. The real being does not discuss or understand the insult to the selves that adversaries or friends fire at us. Those who feel these lashes are the selves that bind our soul. They get involved and react with anger and anger. They are interested in going against the eternal Christ, against our own seed. When students ask us for a remedy to cure pollution, we advise them to abandon anger. Those who have done so obtain benefits. In chapter 28, the Master speaks to us about the will. He tells us that we must work on this work of the Father, but the students believe that it is working with the arcane AZF, working on ourselves, working with the three factors that free our conscience. We must reconquer internally, free the Prometheus that we have chained within us. The creative will is our work, whatever the circumstance in which we find ourselves. The emancipation of the will comes with the elimination of our defects, and nature obeys us. In chapter 29, it tells us about the decapitation, tells us that the quiet parts of our lives are the least favorable for knowing ourselves. This is only achieved in the work of life, in social relationships, business, games, in short, in daily life is when we miss ourselves the most. The sense of internal self-observation is atrophied in every human being. This sense develops progressively with the self-observation that we perform, from moment to moment and with continuous use. Everything that is out of place is bad, and bad ceases to be bad when it is in its place, when it should be. With the power of the Mother Goddess in us, Mother Ramayo, we can only destroy the selves of the different levels of the mind. The formula will be found by readers in several works of V.N. Samael. Stella Maris is the astral subject, the sexual power. She has the power to disintegrate the operations that we carry within our psychological interior. Tone Ants decapitates any psychological self. In Chapter 30, it tells us about the permanent center of gravity, and tells us that each person is a service machine for the innumerable selves that possess it, and therefore the human person does not have a permanent center of gravity, therefore there is only instability to achieve self-realization. Intimate being. Continuity of purpose is required, and this is achieved by removing the egos or selves that we carry within. If we do not work on ourselves, we devolve and degenerate. The initiation process puts us in the 14 path of improvement, leads us to the angelic divine state. In Chapter 31, he tells us about the Gnostic esoteric paths, and tells us that it is necessary to examine the trapped self, or that we recognize it. An essential requirement to be able to destroy it is observation. This allows a ray of light to enter our interior. The destruction of the selves that we have analyzed must be accompanied by services to others, giving them instruction so that they can free themselves from the satans or selves that hinder their own redemption. In Chapter 32, he tells us about prayer at work. He tells us that observation, judgment and execution are the three basic factors of the dissolution of the self. First it is observed, second it is prosecuted, third it is executed. This is what is done with spies in war. The sense of internal self-observation as it develops will allow us to see the progressive progress of our work. 25 years ago, at Christmas 1951, the Master told us here in the city of Sinaga, and later explained it in the Christmas message of 1962, the following: I am on your side until you have formed the Christ in your heart. The responsibility of the people of Aquarius weighs on their shoulders, and the doctrine of love expands through Gnostic knowledge. If you want to follow that doctrine of love, you must stop hating, even in its smallest manifestation. This prepares us for the emergence of the Golden Child, the child of alchemy, the Son of Charles, internal Christ who lives and pulsates in the very depths of 15, our creative energy. Thus we achieve the death of the legions of satanic selves that we keep within, and we prepare for the resurrection, for a total change. This holy doctrine is not understood by the humans of this era, but we must fight for them in the worship of all religions, so that they long for a superior life, directed by superior beings. This body of doctrine returns us to the doctrine of the internal Christ. When we put it into practice, we will change the future of humanity. Inferential peace, Garg Hakashin's 16 chapter. At the level of being, who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What do we live for? Why do we live? Unquestionably, the poor intellectual animal mistakenly called a man, not only does he not know, but he also does not even know that he does not know. The worst of all is the difficult and strange situation in which we find ourselves. We ignore the secret of all our tragedies, and yet we are convinced that we know everything. Take a rational mammal, one of those people who presume to be influential in life, to the center of the Sahara Desert, leave it there far from any oasis, and observe everything that happens from an airship. The facts will speak for themselves. The intellectual humanoid, although he boasts of being strong and believes himself to be very man, deep down he turns out to be frighteningly weak. The rational animal is 100% stupid. He thinks the best of himself. He believes that he can perform wonderfully through kindergarten, urban ID manuals, primary, secondary, high school, university, the good prestige of his father, etc. 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 Unfortunately, after so many letters and good manners, titles and money, we well know that any stomachache makes us sad, and that deep down we continue to be unhappy and miserable. 17. It is enough to read universal history to know that we are the same barbarians of yesteryear, and that instead of improving we have become worse. This 20th century, with all its spectacularity, wars, prostitution, world sodomy, sexual degeneration, drugs, alcohol, exorbitant cruelty, extreme perversity, monstrosity, etc. 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 is the mirror in which we must look. There is therefore no compelling reason to boast of having reached a higher stage of development. Thinking that time means progress is absurd. Unfortunately, the enlightened ignoramuses continue to be bottled up in the dogma of evolution. In all the black pages of black history we always find the same horrible cruelties, ambitions, wars, etc. However, our super-civilized contemporaries are still convinced that war is something secondary, a passing accident that has nothing to do with their much vaunted modern civilization. Certainly what matters is the way of being of each person. Some subjects will be drunks, others teetotalers, those honest and these others scoundrels. There is everything in life. The mass is the sum of the individuals. What is the individual is the mass, it is the government, etc. The mass is therefore the extension of the individual. The transformation of the masses, of the people, is not possible if the individual, if each person, is not transformed. 18. Nobody can deny that there are different social levels. There are people from church and brothels, of commerce and countryside, etc., etc., etc. So there are also different levels of being. What we are internally, splendid or mean, generous or stingy, violent or peaceful, chaste or lustful, attracts the various circumstances of life. A lustful person will always attract scenes, dramas and even tragedies of lasciviousness in which he will find himself involved. A drunk will attract drunks and will always find himself in bars and cantinas. That's obvious. What will the usurer, the selfish, attract? How many problems, prisons, misfortunes? However, bitter people, tired of suffering, want to change, turn the page of their history. Poor people. They want to change and don't know how. They don't know the procedure. They are stuck in a dead end. What happened to you yesterday happens to you today and will happen to you tomorrow. They always repeat the same mistakes and do not learn the lessons of life even with cannon fire. All things are repeated in your own life. They say the same things, do the same things, regret the same things. This boring repetition of dramas, comedies and tragedies will continue as long as we carry within us the undesirable elements of anger, greed, lust, envy, pride, sloth, gluttony, etc., etc., etc. 19. What is our moral level? Or better said, what is our level of being? As long as the level of being does not change radically, the repetition of all our miseries, scenes, misfortunes and misfortunes will continue. All the things, all the circumstances, that happen outside of us, on the stage of this world, are exclusively the reflection of what we carry inside. With just reason we can solemnly assert that the exterior is the reflection of the interior when one changes internally, and such change is radical. The external, circumstances, life, change too. I have been observing for this time, year 1974, a group of people who invaded someone else's land. Here in Mexico such people received the curious nickname of paraquedivers. They are neighbors of the Churubusco country neighborhood. They are very close to my house, which is why I have been able to study them closely. Being poor can never be a crime, but the serious thing is not in that, but in your level of being. Every day they fight among themselves, they get drunk, they insult each other, they become murderers of their own companions in misfortune. They certainly live in filthy huts inside which instead of love, hate reigns. 20. Many times I have thought that if any of those subjects eliminated from their interior hatred, anger, lust, drunkenness, slander, cruelty, selfishness, slander, envy, self-love, pride, etc., 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 would, like other people, would be associated by a simple law of psychological affinities with more refined, more spiritual people. These new relationships would be definitive for economic, and that would be the system that would allow such a subject to leave the garage, the filthy sewer. So, if we really want a radical change, what we must first understand is that each of us, whether white or black, yellow or brown, ignorant or enlightened, etc., is at this or that level of being. What is our level of being? Have you ever thought about that? It would not be possible to move to another level if we ignore the state we are in. 21. Chapter 2. The latter wonderful. We have to yearn for a real change, to get out of this boring routine, from this merely mechanistic life. Tired. What we must first understand with complete clarity is that each one of us, whether bourgeois or proletarian, well-to-do or middle class, rich or miserable, is really at this or that level of being. The level of being of that drunk is different from that of the teetotaler, and that of the prostitute is very different from that of the maiden. What we are saying is irrefutable, irrefutable. When we reach this part of our chapter, we lose nothing by imagining a staircase that extends from bottom to top, vertically and with many steps. Unquestionably, we find ourselves on some of these steps. Downstairs there will be people worse than us. Steps up there will be people better than us. In this extraordinary vertical, in this wonderful staircase, it is clear that we can find all levels of being. Each person is different and no one can refute this. Undoubtedly we are not now talking about ugly or pretty faces, nor is it a question of ages. There are young and old people who are about to die, and newborn children. 22. The question of time and years, that of being born, growing, developing, marrying, reproducing, growing old and dying, is exclusive to the horizontal. In the wonderful staircase, in the vertical, that concept of time does not fit. On the steps of such a scale we can only find levels of being. People's mechanical hope is useless. They believe that with time things will be better. This is how our grandparents and great-grandparents thought. The facts have precisely come to demonstrate the opposite. The level of being is what counts, and this is vertical. We are on one step, but we can climb to another step. The wonderful staircase that we are talking about and that refers to the different levels of being certainly has nothing to do with linear time. A higher level of being is immediately above us from moment to moment. It is not in some remote horizontal future, but here and now, within ourselves. In the vertical, it is obvious, and anyone can understand it, that the two lines horizontal and vertical meet from moment to moment in our psychological interior and form a cross. The personality develops and develops in the horizontal line of life. It is born and dies within its linear time. It is perishable. There is no tomorrow for the personality of the dead. It is not the being. 23. The levels of being. Being itself is not of time. It has nothing to do with the horizontal line. It is found within ourselves. Now, in the vertical, it would be manifestly absurd to look for our own being outside of ourselves. It is not out of place to state the following as a corollary. Titles, degrees, promotions, etc. in the external physical world would in no way originate authentic exaltation, re-evaluation of the being, passage to a higher step in the levels of being. 24. Chapter the Third Rebellion Psychological. It is worth reminding our readers that there is a mathematical point within ourselves. Unquestionably such a point is never found in the past, nor in the future. Whoever wants to discover that mysterious point must look for it here and now, within themselves, exactly at this moment, not a second ahead, not a second back. The two vertical and horizontal sticks of the Holy Cross meet. At this point, we therefore find ourselves from moment to moment facing two paths. The horizontal and the vertical. It is obvious that the horizontal is very cheesy. There are Vicendi and all the people, Villegas and everyone who arrives, Don Romando and everyone. It is evident that the vertical is different. It is the path of intelligent rebels, that of revolutionaries, when one remembers oneself, when one works on oneself, when one does not identify with all the problems and sorrows of life. In fact, one goes along the vertical path. It is certainly never an easy task to eliminate negative emotions. Lose all identification with our own way of life. Problems of all kinds, businesses, debts, payment of bills, mortgages, telephone, water, electricity, etc. 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 25. The unemployed, those who for this or that reason have lost their job, obviously suffer from lack of money and forgetting their case. Not worrying, or identifying with their own problem, is in fact frighteningly difficult. Those who suffer, those who cry, those who have been victims of some betrayal, of a bad payment in life, of ingratitude, of slander or of some fraud, really forget themselves, their real intimate being. They identify completely with its moral tragedy. Working on oneself is the fundamental characteristic of the vertical path. No one could tread the path of the Great Rebellion if they never worked on themselves. The work we are referring to is psychological. It deals with a certain transformation of the present moment in which we find ourselves. We need to learn to live from moment to moment. For example, a person who is desperate due to some sentimental, economic or political problem has obviously forgotten himself. Such a person, if he stops for a moment, if he observes a situation and tries to remember himself and then makes an effort to understand the meaning of his attitude, if you reflect a little, if you think that everything happens, in which life is illusory, fleeting and in which death reduces all the vanities of the world to ashes, if you understand that your problem is basically nothing more than a flare of a backpack, a will-o'-the-wisp that 26 soon goes out, you will suddenly see with surprise that everything has changed. Transforming mechanical reactions is possible through logical confrontation and intimate self-reflection of the being. It is evident that people react mechanically to the various circumstances of life. Poor people. They always tend to become victims. When someone flatters them, they smile. When they are humiliated, they suffer. They insult if they are insulted. They hurt if they are hurt. They are never free. Their peers have the power to take them from joy to sadness, from hope to despair. Each of those people who walk the horizontal path is like a musical instrument, where each of their peers plays whatever they want. Whoever learns to transform mechanical relationships, in fact takes the vertical path. This represents a fundamental change in the level of being, extraordinary result of psychological rebellion. 27. Chapter 4. The Essence. What makes every newborn child beautiful and adorable is its essence. This constitutes in itself its true reality. The normal growth of the essence in every creature is certainly very residual, incipient. The human body grows and develops in accordance with the biological laws of the species. However, such possibilities are in themselves very limited for the essence. Unquestionably, the essence can only grow by itself without help. To a very small degree, speaking frankly and unequivocally, we will say that the spontaneous and natural growth of the essence is only possible during the first 3, 4 and 5 years of age, that is, in the first stage of life. People think that the growth and development of the essence is always carried out continuously, according to the mechanics of evolution, but universal Gnosticism clearly teaches that this does not happen like that. In order for the essence to grow more, something very special must happen, something new must be realized. I want to refer emphatically to the work on oneself. The development of the essence is only possible through conscious work and voluntary suffering. It is necessary to understand that these works do not refer to matters of profession, banking, carpentry, 28 masonry, repair of railway lines or office matters. This work is for everyone who has developed personality. It's something psychological. We all know that we have within ourselves what is called ego, me, myself. Yes, same. Unfortunately, the essence is bottled, trapped, between the ego, and this is regrettable. Dissolving the psychological self, disintegrating its undesirable elements, is urgent, cannot be postponed, cannot be postponed. This is the meaning of working on oneself. We could never free the essence without previously disintegrating the psychological self. In the essence there is religion, the Buddha, wisdom, the particles of pain of our Father who is in heaven, and all the data that we need for the intimate self-realization of the being. No one could annihilate the psychological self without first eliminating the inhuman elements that we carry within. We need to reduce to ashes the monstrous cruelty of these times, the envy that has unfortunately become the secret spring of action, the unbearable greed that has made life so bitter, the disgusting slander, the slander that causes so many tragedies, drunkenness, the filthy lust that smells so bad, etc., etc., etc. 29. As all these abominations are reduced to cosmic dust, the essence will also develop and emancipate itself, harmoniously, will grow. He hinted unquestionably when the psychological self has died, the essence shines in us, the free essence gives us intimate beauty. From such beauty perfect happiness and true love emanate. The essence has multiple senses of perfection and extraordinary natural powers. When we die to ourselves, when we dissolve the psychological self, we enjoy the precious senses and powers of the essence. 30. Chapter V. Accuse yourself, saying the essence that each of us carries within us comes from above, from heaven, from the stars. Unquestionably the wonderful essence comes from the Note Law, the Milky Way, the galaxy in which we live. Precious essence passes through the Note Sol, the Sun, and then the Note Fa, the planetary zone, enters this world and penetrates our own entary. Our parents created the appropriate body for the reception of this essence that comes from the stars. Working intensely on ourselves and sacrificing ourselves for our fellow human beings, we will return victorious to the deep bosom of Urania. We are living in this world for some reason, for something, for some special factor. Obviously there is much in us that we must see, study and understand, if we really want to know something about ourselves, about our own life. Tragic is the existence of one who dies without having known the reason for his life. Each one of us must discover for ourselves the meaning of our own life, that which keeps us prisoner in the prison of pain. 31. Ostensibly there is something in each of us that makes our lives bitter and against which we need to fight firmly. It is not essential that we continue in disgrace. It is urgent to reduce what makes us so weak and unhappy to cosmic dust. It is useless to conceive ourselves with titles, honors, diplomas, money, vain subjective rationalism, well-known virtues, etc., etc., etc. We must never forget that the hypocrisy and the foolish vanities of the false personality make us clumsy, stale, retarded, reactionary people, incapable of seeing what is new. Death has many meanings, both positive and negative. Let us consider that magnificent observation of the great Kabir Jesus the Christ: let the dead bury their dead. Many people, although they live, are in fact dead for any possible work on themselves and therefore, for any intimate transformation. They are people bottled up between their dogmas and beliefs, people petrified in the memories of many yesterdays, individuals full of ancestral prejudices, people who are slaves to what they will say, frighteningly lukewarm, indifferent, sometimes knowledgeable, convinced of being in the truth because they were told so, etc., etc., etc. These people do not want to understand that this world is a psychological gym through which it would be possible 32. Annihilate that secret ugliness that we all carry inside. If these poor people understood the pitiful state they are in, they would tremble with horror. However, such people always think the best of themselves. They boast of their virtues. They feel perfect, kind, helpful, noble, charitable, intelligent, fulfilling their duties, etc. Practical life as a school is formidable, but taking it as an end in itself is manifestly absurd. Those who take life for itself, as it is lived daily, have not understood the need to work on themselves to achieve a radical transformation. Unfortunately, people live mechanically. They have never heard anything about inner work. Change is necessary, but people do not know how to change. They suffer a lot and they don't even know why they suffer. Having money is not everything. The lives of many rich people are often truly tragic. 33. Chapter The Sixth Life. In the field of practical life, we always discover contrasts that astonish. Wealthy people with magnificent residences and many friends sometimes suffer horribly. Humble pick and shovel proletarians or people from the middle class sometimes live in complete happiness. Many millionaires suffer from sexual impotence and rich midwives cry bitterly over their husband's infidelity. The rich of the earth look like vultures in golden cages. These days they cannot live without bodyguards. Statesmen drag chains. They are never free. They walk everywhere surrounded by people armed to the teeth. Let's study this situation more carefully. We need to know what life is. Everyone is free to give their opinion as they wish, whatever they say. No one certainly knows anything. Life is a problem that no one understands. When people want to tell us the story of their life for free, they cite events, names and surnames, dates, etc. and feel satisfaction when telling their stories. These poor people ignore that their stories are incomplete because events, names and dates are only the external aspect of the film. The internal aspect is missing. 3. 4. It is urgent to know states of consciousness. Each event corresponds to this or that state of mind. States are internal and events are external. External events are not everything. Interior states are understood as good or bad dispositions, worries, depression, superstition, fear, suspicion, mercy, self-consideration, overestimation of oneself, states of feeling happy, states of joy, etc. 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 Unquestionably, interior states can correspond exactly to exterior events or be caused by them, or have no relationship whatsoever with them. In any case, states and events are different. Events do not always correspond exactly to related states. The inner state of a pleasant event may not correspond to it. The inner state of an unpleasant event may not correspond to it. Events awaited for a long time. When they came, we felt that something was missing. Certainly the corresponding inner state that had to be combined with the outer event was missing. Many times the event that was not expected turns out to be the one that has given us the best moments. 35. Chapter The Seventh State Inside. Combining internal states with external events correctly is knowing how to live intelligently. Any event intelligently experienced requires its corresponding specific inner state. However, unfortunately, when people review their lives, they think that it in itself is constituted exclusively by external events. Poor people. They think that if this or that event had not happened to them, their life would have been better. They assume that luck came their way and that they lost the opportunity to be happy. They regret what they lost. They cry for what they despised. They moan remembering the old setbacks and calamities. People do not want to realize that vegetating is not living and that the ability to exist consciously depends exclusively on the quality of the interior state of the soul. It certainly does not matter how beautiful the external events of life are. If we are not in such moments in the appropriate internal state, the best events may seem monotonous, tiring or simply boring. Someone anxiously awaits the wedding party. It is an event, but it could happen that they were so worried at the precise moment of the event that 36. I really didn't enjoy any delight in it and that everything became as arid and cold as a protocol. Experience has taught us that not all people who attend a banquet or dance truly enjoy it, yet there is never a lack of boredom in that best of celebrations, and the most delicious pieces make some people happy and make others cry. Others, very rare, are people who know how to confidently combine the external event with the appropriate internal state. It is unfortunate that people do not know how to live consciously. They cry when they should laugh and they laugh when they should cry. Control is different. The wise man can be joyful but never filled with crazy frenzy, sad but never desperate and dejected, serene in the midst of violence, abstemious in the orgy, chaste among lust, etc. Melancholic and pessimistic people think the worst about life and frankly do not want to live. Every day we see people who are not only unhappy, but who also, and what is worse, also make the lives of others bitter. People like that wouldn't change even if they lived daily from party to party. They carry the psychological illness within themselves. Such people have definitely perverse intimate states. 37. However, these subjects describe themselves as just, holy, virtuous, noble, helpful, martyrs, etc. 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 They are people who consider themselves too much, people who love themselves very much, individuals who feel very sorry for themselves and who always look for loopholes to avoid their own responsibilities. People like this are accustomed to lower emotions, and it is obvious that for this reason they create subhuman psychic elements daily. unfortunate events, reversals of fortune, misery, debts, problems, etc. Were exclusive to those people who do not know how to live. Anyone can form a rich intellectual culture, but very few people have learned to live righteously. When one wants to separate external events from the internal states of consciousness, it concretely demonstrates its inability to exist with dignity. Those who learn to consciously combine external events and internal states walk the path of success. 38. Chapter 8 states wrong unquestionably. In the rigorous observation of the myself, it is always urgent and unavoidable to make a complete logical differentiation in relation to the external events of practical life and the intimate states of consciousness. We urgently need to know where we are situated at any given moment, both in relation to the intimate state of consciousness, and in the specific nature of the external event that is happening to us. Life itself is a series of events that are processed through time and space. Someone said, life is a chain of martyrdoms that man carries tangled in his soul. Everyone is very free to think as they want. I believe that the ephemeral pleasures of a fleeting moment are always followed by disappointment and bitterness. Each event has its special characteristic flavor, and the inner states are themselves of a different kind. This is incontrovertible, irrefutable. Certainly the inner work on oneself emphatically refers to the various psychological states of consciousness. No one could deny that within us we carry many errors and that there are wrong states. 39. If we really want to really change, we need, with maximum and urgent urgency, to radically modify these wrong states of consciousness. The absolute modification of wrong states causes complete transformations in the field of practical life. When one works seriously on the wrong states, obviously the unpleasant events of life can no longer hurt one so easily. We are saying something that can only be understood by experiencing it, really feeling it in the very field of facts. He who does not work on himself is always a victim of circumstances. It is like a miserable log among the stormy waters of the ocean. Events change incessantly in their multiple combinations. They come one after another in waves. They are influences. There are certainly good and bad events. Some events will be better or worse than others. Modifying certain events is possible. Altering results, modifying situations, etc. It's certainly within the range of possibilities. However, there are factual situations that truly cannot be altered. In these latter cases they must be consciously accepted, although some are very dangerous and even painful. 40. Unquestionably, pain disappears when we do not identify with the problem that has arisen. We must consider life as a successive series of interior states. An authentic story of our particular life is made up of all those states. By reviewing the entirety of our own existence, we can verify for ourselves directly that many unpleasant situations were possible thanks to wrong internal states. Alexander the Great, although he was always tempered by nature, gave himself over out of pride to the excesses that caused his death. Francis I died because of a dirty and abominable adultery, which history still remembers very well. When Mara was murdered by a perverse nun, he was dying of pride and envy. He believed himself to be absolutely righteous. The ladies of Servants' Park unquestionably completely destroyed the vitality of the hideous fornicator named Louis XV. Many people die from ambition, anger or jealousy. Psychologists know this very well. As soon as our will is irrevocably confirmed in an absurd tendency, we become candidates for the Pantheon or cemetery. Othello, due to jealousy, became a murderer, and the prison is full of sincerely mistaken people. 41. Chapter the 9th Events. Personal full intimate self-observation of myself is unavoidable when it comes to discovering wrong psychological states. Unquestionably, wrong internal states can be corrected through procedures. Correct. Since the inner life is the magnet that attracts external events, we need, with maximum urgency that cannot be postponed, to eliminate erroneous psychological states from our psyche. Correcting erroneous psychological states is essential to fundamentally alter the nature of certain undesirable events. Altering our relationship with certain events is possible if we eliminate certain absurd psychological states from within us. Destructive external situations could become harmless and even constructive through the intelligent correction of erroneous internal states. One can change the nature of the unpleasant events that occur to us when one purifies oneself intimately. He who never corrects absurd psychological states, believing himself to be very strong, becomes a victim of circumstances. 42. Putting order in our messy interior house is vital when we want to change the course of an unhappy existence. People complain about everything. They suffer, they cry, they protest. They would like to change their lives, to get out of the misfortune in which they find themselves. Unfortunately, they do not work on themselves. People do not want to realize that inner life attracts external circumstances, and that if these are painful, it is due to absurd internal states. The exterior is only the reflection of the interior. Whoever changes internally originates a new order of things. external events would never be as important as the way we react to them. Did you remain calm in the face of the insulter? Did you welcome the unpleasant manifestations of your peers? How did you react to the infidelity of your loved one? Did you let yourself be carried away by the poison of jealousy? Did you kill? Are you in jail? The hospitals, the cemeteries, the prisons, are full of sincerely mistaken people who reacted in an absurd way to external events. The best weapon that a man can use in life is a correct psychological state. One can disarm beasts and unmask traitors through appropriate internal states. 43. Wrong inner states make us helpless victims of human perversity. Learn to face the most unpleasant events of practical life with an appropriate inner attitude. Do not identify yourself with any event. Remember that everything passes. Learn to see life like a movie and you will receive the benefits. Do not forget that events without any value could lead you to misfortune if you do not eliminate the wrong internal states from your psyche. Every external event unquestionably needs the appropriate ticket. That is, the precise psychological state. 44. Chapter the 10th. The different you. The rational mammal, mistakenly called man, does not really have a defined individuality. Unquestionably, this lack of psychological unity in the humanoid is the cause of so many difficulties and bitterness. The physical body is a complete unit and works as an organic whole, unless it is sick. However, the inner life of the humanoid is in no way a psychological unity. The most serious thing about all this, despite what the various pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occult schools say, is the absence of psychological organization in the intimate depths of each subject. Certainly in such conditions, there is no harmonious work as a whole, in the inner life of people. The human what, with respect to its inner state, is a psychological multiplicity, a sum of I's. The enlightened ignorant people of this dark age worship the self, deify it, put it on altars, call it alter ego, higher self, divine self, etc. 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 The wises of this black age in which we live do not want to realize that higher self or I. 4. 5. Inferior, are two sections of the same pluralized ego. The humanoid certainly does not have a permanent self but rather a multitude of different selves. Subhuman and absurd. The poor intellectual animal mistakenly called man is similar to a house in disarray where instead of a master, there are many servants who always want to command and do whatever they want. The biggest mistake of pseudo-esotericism and cheap pseudo-occultism is to assume that others possess or that one has a permanent and immutable self without beginning and without end. If those who think this way awaken consciousness even for a moment, they could clearly demonstrate for themselves that the rational humanoid is never the same for long. The intellectual mammal, from a psychological point of view, is continually changing. To think that if a person's name is Louise he is always Louise, it is something like a joke and very bad taste. That subject who is called Louise has in himself other I's, other egos, which are expressed through his personality at different times, and although Louise does not like greed, another I in him, let's call him Pepe, likes of greed and so on. No person is the same continuously. You really don't need to be very wise to fully realize the innumerable changes and contradictions of each subject. 46. Supposing that someone has a permanent and immutable self is, of course, equivalent to abuse towards others and towards oneself. Within each person, like many people, many eyes, this can be verified by oneself indirectly. Any awake, conscious person. 47. Chapter the 11th. The dear ego. Since superior and inferior are two sections of the same thing, it does not hurt to establish the following corollary. Superior self, lower self are two aspects of the same dark and pluralized ego. The so-called divine self or higher self, alter ego or something like that, is certainly a trick of the self, a form of self-deception. When the self wants to continue here and in the hereafter, it deceives itself with the false concept of an immortal divine self. None of us has a true, permanent, immutable, eternal, ineffable, etc. 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 None of us truly have a true and authentic unity of being. Unfortunately, we do not even have a legitimate individuality. Although the ego continues beyond the grave, it nevertheless has a beginning and an end. The ego, the self, is never something individual, unitary. Obviously the self is self. In Eastern Tibet the self are called psychic aggregates or simply values, whether the latter are positive or negative. If we think of each I as a different person, we can emphatically assert the following. Within each person who lives in the world, there are many people. 48. Unquestionably, many different people live within each one of us, some better, others worse. Each one of these selves, each one of these people fights for supremacy, wants to be exclusive, controls the intellectual brain or the emotional and motor centers whenever it can, while another displaces it. The doctrine of many selves was taught in Eastern Tibet by the true clairvoyants, by the authentic enlightened ones. Each of our psychological defects is personified in this or that self. Since we have thousands and even millions of defects, ostensibly many people live inside us. In psychological matters we have been able to clearly show that paranoid, egomaniacal and mythomaniac subjects would for nothing in life abandon the cult of their beloved ego. Unquestionably such people mortally hate the doctrine of many eyes. When one really wants to know oneself, one must observe oneself and try to know the different eyes that are included within the personality. If any of our readers still do not understand this doctrine of the many eyes, it is exclusively due to the lack of practice in a matter of self-observation. As one practices self-observation interior, he discovers many people for himself. 49. Too many eyes, that live within our own personality. Those who deny that doctrine of many selves, who worship one divine self, have undoubtedly never seriously self-observed themselves. Speaking this time in Socratic style, we will say that these people not only ignore but also ignore that they ignore. Certainly we could never know ourselves without serious and deep self-observation. As long as any subject continues to consider himself as one, it is clear that any internal change will be more than impossible. 50. Chapter the 12th. Change radical. As long as a man continues with the error of believing himself one, unique, individual, it is evident that radical change will be more than impossible. The very fact that esoteric work begins with the rigorous observation of oneself is indicated to us a multiplicity of psychological factors. Egos are undesirable elements that it is urgent to extirpate, eradicate from our interior. Unquestionably, in no way would it be possible to eliminate unknown errors. It is urgent to first observe what we want to separate from our psyche. This type of work is not external but internal, and those who think that any external and superficial civility manual or ethical system can lead them to success will in fact be totally wrong. The concrete and definitive fact that intimate work begins with attention focused on full self-observation is more than enough reason to demonstrate that this requires a very particular personal effort from each of us. Speaking frankly and unequivocally, we emphatically assert the following: no human being could do this job for us. No change is possible in our psyche without the direct observation of this entire set of subjective factors that we carry within us. 51. Taking for granted the multiplicity of errors, discarding the need for study and direct observation of them, in fact means an evasion or escape, an escape from oneself, a form of self-deception. Only through the rigorous effort of judicious self-observation, without loopholes of any kind, will we be able to truly show that we are not one but many, admitting the plurality of the self and evidencing it through rigorous observation are two different aspects. Someone can accept the doctrine of many selves without ever having demonstrated it. The latter is only possible by carefully observing oneself. Avoiding the work of intimate observation, seeking evasion, is an unmistakable sign of degeneration. As long as a man maintains the illusion that he is always one and the same person, he cannot change, and it is obvious that the purpose of this work is precisely to achieve a gradual change in our inner life. Radical transformation is a definite possibility that is normally lost when you do not work on yourself. The initial point of radical change remains hidden as long as man continues to believe himself to be one. Those who reject the doctrine of many selves clearly demonstrate that they have never seriously observed themselves. 52. The severe observation of oneself without escapes of any kind allows us to verify for ourselves the crude realism that we are not one but many. In the world of subjective opinions, various pseudo-esoteric or pseudo-occult theories always serve as an ally to escape from oneself. Unquestionably, the illusion that one is always one and the same person serves as an obstacle to self-observation. Someone could say, I know that I am not one but many. Gnosis has taught me that such a statement, even if it were very sincere, if there were no full lived experience regarding the doctrinal aspect, obviously such a statement would be something merely external and superficial. Demonstrating, experimenting and understanding is essential. Only then is it possible to work consciously to achieve radical change. Affirming is one thing and understanding is another. When someone says, I understand that I am not one but many, if his understanding is true and not mere insubstantial verbiage and ambiguous talk, this indicates, points out, accuses, full verification of the doctrine of many selves. Knowledge and understanding are different. The first of these is of the mind, the second of the heart. The mere knowledge of the doctrine of the many eyes of no use. Unfortunately, in these times in which we live, knowledge has gone far beyond understanding, because the poor intellectual animal mistakenly called man, 53, he developed exclusively the side of knowledge, unfortunately forgetting the corresponding side of being. Knowing the doctrine of many selves and understanding it is essential for any true radical change. When a man begins to look closely at himself, from the angle that he is not one but many, he has obviously begun serious work on his inner nature. 54. Chapter the 13th. Observer and observed. It is very clear and it is not difficult to understand that when someone begins to seriously observe themselves from the point of view that they are not one but many, they really begin to work on all that they carry inside. The following psychological defects are an obstacle, stumbling block to the work of intimate self-observation. Mythomania, delusion of grandeur, believing oneself to be a god. Egolatry, belief in a permanent self. Worship of any kind of alter ego. Paranoia, wisdom, self-sufficiency, conceit, believing oneself infallible. Mystical pride, a person who does not know how to see another's point of view. When one continues with the absurd conviction that one is one, that one has a permanent self, serious work on oneself becomes more than impossible. He who always believes himself to be one will never be able to separate himself from his own undesirable elements. He will consider each thought, feeling, desire, emotion, passion, affection, etc., as different, unmodifiable functionalisms of his own nature, and will even justify himself to others by saying that such personal defects are of his own nature. Hereditary character. Whoever accepts the doctrine of many selves, understands based on observation that each desire, thought, action, passion, etc. corresponds to this or another different self. 55. Any athlete of intimate self-observation works very seriously within himself and strives to remove from his psyche the various undesirable elements that he carries within. If one truly and very sincerely begins to observe oneself internally, one ends up dividing into two, observer and observed. If such a division did not occur, it is evident that we would never take a step forward on the wonderful path of self-knowledge. How could we observe ourselves if we make the mistake of not wanting to divide ourselves between observer and observed? If such a division did not occur, it is obvious that we would never take a step forward on the path of self-knowledge. Undoubtedly, when this division does not occur, we continue identified with all the processes of the pluralized self. Whoever identifies with the various processes of the pluralized self is always a victim of circumstances. How could someone who does not know himself modify circumstances? How could someone who has never observed himself internally know himself? How could someone self-observe if they do not previously divide themselves into observer and observer? Now, no one can begin to change radically until they are able to say, this desire is an animal self that I must eliminate. This selfish thought is another self that torments me and that I need 56 disintegrate. This feeling that hurts my heart is an intrusive I that I need to reduce to cosmic dust, etc., etc., etc. Naturally, this is impossible for those who have never divided themselves between observer and observed. Whoever takes all his psychological processes as functionalisms of a unique, individual and permanent self, finds himself so identified with all his errors, he has them so united to himself, that he has for this reason lost the ability to separate them from his psyche. Obviously, people like this can never change radically. They are people condemned to the most resounding failure. 57. Chapter the 14th. Thoughts. Negatives. Thinking deeply and with full attention is strange in this involutive and decadent era. From the intellectual center arise various thoughts come in, not from a permanent self as the enlightened ignorant foolishly suppose, but from the different eyes in each of us. When a man is thinking, he firmly believes that he in and of himself is thinking. The poor intellectual mammal does not want to realize that the multiple thoughts that cross through its understanding have their origin in the different eyes that we carry inside. This means that we are not truly thinking individuals. We really don't have an individual mind yet. However, each of the different eyes that we carry inside uses our intellectual center, uses it every time it comes to think. It would be absurd, then, to identify with this or that negative and harmful thought, believing it to be a private property. Obviously, this or that negative thought comes from any eye that at a given moment has abused our intellectual center. There are different types of negative thoughts. Suspicion, mistrust, ill will towards another. 58. Person, passionate jealousy, religious jealousy, political jealousy, jealousy over friends or family, greed, lust, revenge, anger, pride, envy, hatred, resentment, theft, adultery, laziness, gluttony, etc., etc., etc. There are really so many psychological defects that we have, that even if we had a palette of stealing 1,000 languages to speak, we would not be able to fully list them. As a sequence or corollary of what was said above, it is crazy to identify with negative thoughts. Since it is not possible for an effect to exist without a cause, we solemnly affirm that a thought could never exist by itself. By spontaneous generation, the relationship between thinker and thought is ostensible. Every negative thought originates from a different thinker. In each of us there are as many negative thinkers, as many thoughts of the same nature. Looking at this question from the pluralized angle of thinkers and thoughts, it happens that each of the I's that we carry in our psyche is certainly a different thinker. Unquestionably within each one of us, there are too many thinkers. However, each of these, despite being only a part, is believed to be the whole, at a given moment. 59. The mythomaniacs, the egomaniacs, the narcissists, the paranoid, would never accept the thesis of the plurality of thinkers because they love themselves too much. They feel like Tarzan's dad or the mother of the chicksie. How could such a normal people accept the idea that they do not possess an individual, brilliant, wonderful mind? However, such wise men think the best of themselves and even dress in the tunic of Aristippus to demonstrate wisdom and humility. The centuries-old legend goes that Aristippus, wanting to demonstrate wisdom and humility, dressed in an old tunic full of patches and holes. He grasped the staff of philosophy in his right hand and walked through the streets of Athens. They say that when Socrates saw him come in, he exclaimed with a loud voice, "O Aristippus, your vanity can be seen through the holes in your clothing." Those who do not always live in a state of novelty alert, perception alert, thinking that they are thinking, easily identify with any negative thought. As a result of this, it unfortunately strengthens the sinister power of the negative self, author of the corresponding thought in question. The more we identify with a negative thought, the more slaves we will be to the corresponding I that characterizes it. 60. With respect to Gnosis, to the secret path, to work on oneself, our particular temptations are found precisely in the eyes that hate Gnosis, esoteric work, because they are not unaware that their existence within our psyche is mortally threatened by Gnosis and by work. These negative selves and quarrelsomes easily take over certain mental scrolls stored in our intellectual center and sequentially originate harmful mental currents. If we accept those thoughts, those negative selves that at any given moment control our intellectual center, we will then be unable to free ourselves from their results. We must never forget that every negative self-deceives and deceive. Conclusion. Lie. Every time we feel a sudden loss of strength, when the aspirant becomes disillusioned with Gnosis, with esoteric work, when he loses enthusiasm and abandons the best, it is obvious that he has been deceived by some negative self. The negative self of adultery annihilates noble homes and makes children miserable. The negative self of jealousy deceives the beings they adore and destroys their happiness. The negative self of mystical pride deceives the devotees of the path and they, feeling wise, hate their master or betray him. The negative self appeals to our personal experiences, our memories, our best 61 longings, to our sincerity, and, through a rigorous selection of all this, presents something in a false light, something that fascinates and failure comes. However, when one discovers the I in action, when one has learned to live in a state of alert, such deception becomes impossible. 62. Chapter the 15th. The individuality. Believing yourself to be one is certainly a joke and very bad taste. Unfortunately, this vain illusion exists within each of us. Unfortunately, we always think the best of ourselves. It never occurs to us to understand that we do not even possess true individuality. The worst thing about it is that we even give ourselves the false luxury of assuming that each of us enjoys full consciousness and free will. Poor us. How foolish we are. There is no doubt that ignorance is the worst of misfortunes. Within each of us there are many thousands of different individuals, different subjects, I's or people who quarrel with each other, who fight for supremacy and who have no order or agreement. If we were aware, if we woke up from so many dreams and fantasies, how different life would be. To top off our misfortune, negative emotions and self-considerations and self-love fascinate us, hypnotize us. They never allow us to remember ourselves, to see ourselves as we are. We believe we have only one will when in reality we have many different wills. Each I has its own. The tragicomedy of all this interior multiplicity is terrifying. The different inner wills. 63. They collide with each other, they live in continuous conflict, they act in different directions. If we had true individuality, if we possessed one unity instead of a multiplicity, we would also have continuity of purposes, awakened consciousness, particular, individual will. Change is the right thing to do, however we must start by being honest with ourselves. We need to make a psychological inventory of ourselves to know what we have left and what we lack. It is possible to achieve individuality, but if we believe we have it, such a possibility will disappear. It is evident that we would never fight to get something we think we have. Fantasy makes us believe that we are possessors of individuality, and there are even schools in the world that teach it this way. It is urgent to fight against fantasy. It makes us appear as if we were this or that, when in reality we are miserable, shameless and perverse. We think we are men, when in truth we are just intellectual mammals devoid of individuality. Mythomaniacs believe they are gods, Muhammad's, etc., without even suspecting that they do not even have an individual mind and conscious will. Egomaniacs adore their beloved ego so much that they would never accept the idea of the multiplicity of egos within themselves. 64. The parrot, with all the classical pride that characterizes them, will not even read this book. It is essential to fight to the death against the fantasy about ourselves, if we do not want to be victims of artificial emotions and false experiences that, in addition to putting us in ridiculous situations, stop all possibility of inner development. The intellectual animal is so hypnotized by its fantasy that it dreams that it is a lion or an eagle, when in truth it is nothing more than a vile worm from the mud. Of the mythomaniac would never accept these statements made above. Obviously he feels like an arch-hierophant no matter what they say, without suspecting that fantasy is merely nothing but fantasy. Fantasy is a real force that acts universally on humanity and that keeps the intellectual humanoid in a state of sleep, causing him to believe that he is already a man, that he has true individuality, will, awakened consciousness, particular mind, etc., etc., etc. When we think we are one, we cannot move from where we are in ourselves. We remain stagnant and ultimately we degenerate, we devolve. Each one of us is in a certain psychological stage, and we will not be able to get out of it unless we directly discover all those people arise that live within our person. It is clear that through intimate self-observation we can see the people who live in our psyche. 65. And that we need to eliminate to achieve radical transformation. This perception, this self-observation, fundamentally changes all the wrong concepts that we had about ourselves, and as a result we evidence the concrete fact that we do not possess true individuality. As long as we do not observe ourselves, we will live in the illusion that we are one, and consequently our life will be wrong. It is not possible to relate correctly with our peers until an interior change is made in the depths of our psyche. Any intimate change requires the prior elimination of the selves that we carry within. In no way could we eliminate such egos if we do not observe them within ourselves. Those who feel one, who think the best of themselves, who would never accept the doctrine of the many, do not wish to observe the eyes either, and therefore any possibility of change becomes impossible for them. It is not possible to change if it is not eliminated, but whoever feels that he or she is the possessor of individuality, if he/she accepted that he/she must eliminate, would really ignore what he/she must eliminate. However, we must not forget that he who believes himself to be one, self-deceived, believes that if he knows what he should eliminate, but in truth he does not even know that he does not know, he is an enlightened ignoramus. 66. We need to individualize to bresky old mees, unsweetelfhisses who believe they possess individuality cannot possibly become unselfish. Individuality is 100% sacred. Rare are those who have it, but everyone thinks they have it. How could we eliminate I if we believe we have a unique I? Certainly only those who have never seriously self-observed themselves think that they have a unique self. However, we must be very clear in this teaching, because there is a psychological danger of confusing authentic individuality with the concept of some kind of higher self or something of that nature. The sacred individuality is far beyond any form of I. It is what it is, what it always has been, and what it always will be. The legitimate individuality is being, and the reason for being of being is being itself. Distinguish between the being and the I. Those who confuse the self with the self have certainly never seriously observed themselves. As long as the essence, the consciousness, continues, bottled among all that set of selves that we carry inside, radical change will be something more than impossible. 67. Chapter 16. The Book of the Life. A person is what his life is. That which continues beyond death is life. This is the meaning of that book of life that opens with death. Looking at this question from a strictly psychological point of view, any given day in our life is really a small replica of the totality of life. From all this we can infer the following. If a man does not work on himself today, he will never change. When you affirm that you want to work on yourself, and you do not work today and postpone it until tomorrow, such an affirmation will be a simple project and nothing more, because today is the replica of our entire life. There is a vulgar saying out there that says, "Do not leave until tomorrow what can be done today." If a man says, "I will work on myself tomorrow," he will never work on himself, because there will always be a tomorrow. This is very similar to a certain notice, announcement or sign that some merchants put in their stores. Today no FIO, tomorrow yes. When someone in need comes to request credit, they come across the terrible notice, and if they return the next day, they find the unfortunate advertisement or sign again. 68. This is what is called in psychology the disease of tomorrow. As long as a man says tomorrow, he will never change. We need with utmost urgency, which cannot be postponed, to work on ourselves today, not to dream lazily about a future or an extraordinary opportunity. Those who say, "I'll do this or that first and then I'll work," they will never work on themselves. Those are the inhabitants of the earth mentioned in the Holy Scriptures. I met a powerful landowner who said, "I need to first round myself out and then work on myself." When he became deathly ill, I visited him. Then I asked him the following question: "Do you still want to get better?" "I'm really sorry for wasting my time," he replied. Days later he died, after having recognized his mistake. That man had a lot of land, but he wanted to take over the neighboring properties, round himself up, so that his estate would be exactly limited by 4 roads. "Every day your desire is enough," said the great Kabir Jesus. Observe ourselves today, regarding the always recurring day, a miniature of our entire life. When a man begins to work on himself, today when he observes his disappointments and sorrows, he walks on the path to success. 69. It would not be possible to eliminate what we do not know. We must first observe our own mistakes. We need to not only know our day, but also the relationship with it. There is a certain ordinary day that each person experiences directly, except for unusual events. It is interesting to observe the daily recurrence, the repetition of words and events, for each person, etc. This repetition or recurrence of events and words deserves to be studied. It leads us to self-knowledge. 70. Chapter the 17th. Creatures mechanical. In no way could we deny the law of recurrence processing in every moment of our lives. Certainly in every day of our existence, there is repetition of events, states of consciousness, words, desires, thoughts, volitions, etc. It is obvious that when one does not observe oneself, one cannot realize this incessant daily repetition. It is evident that those who do not feel any interest in observing themselves do not want to work to achieve a truly radical transformation. To make matters worse, there are people who want to transform themselves without working on themselves. We do not deny the fact that everyone has the right to real happiness of the spirit, but it is also true that happiness would be more than impossible if we do not work on ourselves. One can change intimately when one truly manages to modify one's reactions to the various events that occur daily. However, we could not modify our way of reacting to the facts of practical life if we did not work seriously on ourselves. We need to change our way of thinking, be less negligent, become more serious and take life differently, in its real and practical sense. 71. However, if we continue as we are, behaving in the same way every day, repeating the same mistakes, with the same negligence as always, any possibility of change will be effectively eliminated. If one truly wants to get to know oneself, one must begin by observing one's own behavior in the face of the events of any day of one's life. With this we do not mean that one should not observe oneself daily, we only want to affirm that one should begin by observing oneself on the first day. In everything there must be a beginning, and starting by observing our behavior on any day of our life is a good start. Observing our mechanical reactions to all those small details of the bedroom, home, dining room, house, street, work, etc. 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 What one says, feels and thinks, is certainly the most appropriate. The important thing is to see later how or in what way one can change those reactions. However, if we believe that we are good people, that we never behave unconsciously and wrongly, we will never change. First of all, we need to understand that we are people machines, simple puppets controlled by secret agents, by hidden selves. Many people live within our person, we are never identical. Sometimes a mean person appears in us, other times an irritable person, at any other moment a splendid, benevolent person, later a person 72 scandalous or slanderer, then a saint, then a liar, etc. We have people of all kinds within each of us, egos of all kinds. Our personality is nothing more than a puppet, a talking doll, something mechanical. Let's start by behaving consciously during a small part of the day. We need to stop being simple machines, even for a few minutes a day. This will decisively influence our existence. When we observe ourselves and do not do what this or that wants, it is clear that we begin to stop being machines. A single moment, when one is conscious enough to stop being a machine, if done voluntarily, usually radically changes many unpleasant circumstances. Unfortunately, we live a mechanistic, routine, absurd life daily. We repeat events, our habits are the same, we have never wanted to change them, they are the mechanical rail on which the train of our miserable existence circulates. However, we think the best of ourselves. Mahomets abound everywhere, those who believe they are gods. Mechanical, routine creatures, characters from the mud of the earth, miserable dolls moved by various eyes. People like that won't work on themselves. 73. Chapter the 18th. The bread super substantial. If we carefully observe any day of our life, we will see that we certainly do not know how to live consciously. Our life seems like a train in motion, moving on the fixed rails of mechanical, rigid habits, of a vain and superficial existence. The curious thing is that it never occurs to us to change our habits. It seems that we never get tired of always saying the same thing. Habits have us petrified. The more we think we are free, we are frighteningly ugly, but we believe we are pillows. We are mechanical people, which is more than enough reason to lack any true feeling for what we are doing in life. We move daily within the old lane of our outdated and absurd habits, and so it is clear that we do not have a real life. Instead of living, we vegetate miserably, and receive no new impressions. If a person started his day consciously, it is obvious that such a day would be very different from other day when you take the totality of your life, as the very day you are living. When you do not leave for tomorrow what must be done today, you really come to know what it means to work on yourself. 74. A day is never unimportant. If we really want to radically transform ourselves, we must see ourselves, observe ourselves, and understand ourselves daily. However, people do not want to see themselves. Some wanting to work on themselves justify their negligence with phrases like the following: work in the office does not allow you to work on yourself. These are meaningless, hollow, vain, absurd words that only serve to justify indolence, laziness, and lack of love for the great cause. People like this, although they have many spiritual concerns, it is obvious that they will never change. Observing ourselves is urgent, cannot be postponed, cannot be postponed. Intimate self-observation is fundamental for true change. What is your psychological state when you wake up? What is your mood during breakfast? Were you impatient with the waiter? With your wife? Why were you impatient? What always bothers you? Upset? Etc. Smoking or reading less is not a whole change, but it does indicate some progress. We well know that vice and gluttony are inhuman and bestial. It is not right for someone dedicated to the secret path to have a physical body, excessively fattened with a bulging belly and outside of any eurythmy of perfection. That would indicate gluttony, and even laziness. Daily life, profession, employment, although vital for existence, constitute the dream of consciousness. 75. Knowing that life is a dream does not mean having understood it. Understanding comes with self-observation and intense work on oneself. To work on yourself, it is essential to work on your daily life, today, and then you will understand what that phrase from the Lord's Prayer means. Give us our daily bread. The phrase every day means supersubstantial bread in Greek, or the bread from above. Gnosis gives that bread of life and the double sense of ideas and forces that allow us to disintegrate psychological errors. Every time we reduce this or that to cosmic dust, we gain psychological experience, we eat the bread of wisdom, we receive new knowledge. Gnosis offers us the supersubstantial bread, the bread of wisdom, and points us precisely to the new life that begins in oneself, within oneself, here and now. Now, no one can alter his life or change anything related to the mechanical reactions of existence, unless he has the help of new ideas and receives divine help. Gnosis gives these new ideas and teaches the modus operandi by which one can be assisted by forces superior to the mind. We need to prepare the lower centers of our organism to receive the ideas and strength that come from the higher centers. 76. There is nothing negligible in working on oneself. Any thought, no matter how insignificant, deserves to be observed. Any negative emotions, reactions, etc. must be observed. 77. Chapter the 19th. The good owner from home. Removing oneself from the disastrous effects of life. In these dark times, it's certainly very difficult but indispensable, otherwise it is devoured by life. Any work that one does on oneself with the purpose of achieving emotional and spiritual development is always related to isolation, very well understood, because under the influence of life as we always live it, it is not possible to develop anything other than the personality. In no way do we try to oppose the development of personality. Obviously it is necessary in existence, but certainly it is something merely artificial. It is not true realness. If the poor intellectual man, mistakenly called man, does not isolate himself, but identifies himself with all the events of practical life and squanders his forces on negative emotions and personal self-considerations and vain and substantial chatter of ambiguous talk, nothing edifying, no real element can develop in it, outside of what belongs to the world of mechanics. Certainly, whoever truly wants to achieve the development of the essence within himself must become hermetically closed. This refers to something intimate closely related to silence. 78. The phrase comes from ancient times, when a doctrine on the inner development of man linked to the name of Hermes was secretly taught. If one wants something real to grow within oneself, it is clear that one must avoid the escape of one's psychic energies. When one has energy leaks and is not isolated in his privacy, it is unquestionable that he will not be able to achieve the development of something real in his psyche. Ordinary life wants to devour us relentlessly. We must fight against life daily. We must learn to swim against the current. This word goes against life. It is something very different from everyday work, and yet we must practice it from moment to moment. I want to refer to the revolution of consciousness. It is evident that if our attitude towards daily life is fundamentally wrong, if we believe that everything is going well, just because disappointments will come, people want things to turn out well for them, just because everything must go according to their plans, but the harsh reality is different. As long as one does not change internally, whether one likes it or not, one will always be a victim of the circumstances. Many sentimental stupidities are said and written about life, but this treatise on revolutionary psychology is different. This doctrine goes to the point, to concrete, clear and definitive facts. Emphatically states that the animal 79 intellectual mistakenly called man is a mechanical, unconscious, sleeping puppet. The good homeowner would never accept revolutionary psychology. He fulfills all his duties as a father, husband, etc., and therefore thinks the best of himself, but he only serves the purposes of nature, and that is all. By contrast, we will say that there is also that good homeowner who swims against the current, who does not want to let himself be devoured by life. However, these subjects are very rare in the world. They are never when one thinks according to the ideas of this treatise on revolutionary psychology, one obtains a correct vision of life. 80. Chapter 20. The two worlds. Observing and observing oneself are two completely different things, yet both demand attention. In observation, attention is oriented outward, towards the outside world, through the windows of the senses. In self-observation of oneself, attention is oriented inward, and for this the senses of external perception are not useful. This is more than enough reason to make it difficult for the neophyte to observe their intimate psychological processes. The starting point of official science in its practical side is what is observable. The starting point of working on oneself is self-observation, the self-observable. Unquestionably, these two starting points mentioned above take us in completely different directions. Someone could grow old immersed in the compromised dogmas of official science, studying external phenomena, observing cells, atoms, molecules, suns, stars, comets, etc., without experiencing any radical change within themselves. The kind of knowledge that transforms someone internally could never be achieved through external observation. The true knowledge that can really cause a fundamental inner change in us. 81. It is based on direct self-observation of oneself. It is urgent to tell our Gnostic students to observe themselves, and in what sense they should observe themselves, and the reasons for this. Observation is a means of modifying the mechanical conditions of the world. Inner self, observation is a means to change intimately. As a sequence or corollary of all this, we can must affirm emphatically that there are two kinds of knowledge, external and internal, and that unless we have within ourselves the magnetic center that can differentiate the qualities of knowledge, this mixture of the two plants or orders of ideas could lead us to confusion. Sublime pseudo-esoteric doctrines with marked scientism in that background belong to the realm of the observable, however they are accepted by many aspirants as internal knowledge. We are therefore faced with two worlds, the exterior and the interior. The first of these is perceived by the senses of external perception. The second can only be perceptible through the sense of internal self-observation. Thoughts, ideas, emotions, desires, hopes, disappointments, etc. are interior, invisible to the ordinary, common senses, and yet they are more real to us than the dining room table or the living room armchairs. 82. Certainly we live more in our internal world than in the external one. This is irrefutable. In our inner worlds, in our secret world, we love, we desire, we suspect, we bless, we curse, we long, we suffer, we enjoy, we are defrauded, rewarded, etc., etc., etc. Unquestionably, the two worlds, internal and external, are experimentally verifiable. The external world is what is observable. The inner world is the self-observable in itself and within itself, here and now. Who really wants to know the inner worlds of the planet Earth or the solar system or the galaxy in which we live? You must first know your intimate world, your inner, particular life, your own internal worlds. Man, know yourself and you will know the universe and the gods. The more you explore this inner world called oneself, the more you will understand that you live simultaneously in two worlds, in two realities, in two realms, the exterior and the interior. In the same way that it is essential for one to learn to walk in the outside world, so as not to fall off a cliff, not to get lost in the streets of the city, to select one's friends, not to associate with perverts, not to eat poison, etc. So also through psychological work on ourselves, let us learn to walk in the inner world, which is explorable through self-observation. 83. Truly, the sense of self-observation is atrophied in the decadent human race of this dark age in which we live. As we persevere in self-observation of ourselves, the sense of intimate self-observation progressively develops. Higana 84. Chapter the 21st. Observation of itself. Intimate self-observation of oneself is a practical means to achieve radical transformation. Knowing and observing are different. Many confuse self-observation with knowing. We know that we are sitting in a chair in a room, but this does not mean that we are observing the chair. We know that at a given moment we are in a negative state, perhaps with a problem or worried about this or that issue, or in a state of restlessness or uncertainty, etc. But this does not mean that we are observing it. Do you dislike someone? Do you dislike a certain person? Why? You will say that you know that person, place. Observe her. Knowing is never observing. Do not confuse knowing with observing. Self-observation, which is 100% active, is a means of self-change, while knowing, which is passive, is not. Certainly knowing is not an act of attention. The attention directed towards oneself, towards what is happening inside us, if it is something positive, active, in the case of a person who is disliked just because we feel like it, and often without any reason, one notices the multitude of thoughts that accumulate in the mind, the group of voices that speak and shout disorderly inside of 85 ourselves, what they are saying, the unpleasant emotions that arise within us, the unpleasant taste that all this leaves in our psyche, etc. 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 Obviously, in such a state we also realize that internally we are treating the person we dislike very badly. But to see all this, it unquestionably requires attention intentionally directed within oneself, not passive attention. Dynamic attention actually comes from the observing side, while thoughts and emotions belong to the observed side. All this makes us understand that knowing is something completely passive and mechanical, in obvious contrast to self-observation, which is a conscious act. With this we do not mean to say that mechanical self-observation does not exist, but this type of observation has nothing to do with the psychological self-observation to which we are referring. Thinking and observing are also very different. Any subject can afford to think about himself as much as he wants, but this does not mean that he is really observing himself. We need to see the different eyes in action, discover them in our psyche, understand that within each one of them there is a percentage of our own consciousness, regret having created them, etc. 86. Then we will exclaim, but what is this self doing? What is he saying? What do you want? Why do you torment me with your lust? With your anger? Etc. 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 Then we will see within ourselves all the train of thoughts, emotions, desires, passions, private comedies, personal dramas, elaborate lies, speeches, excuses, morbidities, beds of pleasure, pictures of lasciviousness, etc. 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 Many times before we sleep, at the precise moment of transition between wakefulness and sleep, we feel within our own mind different voices that speak to each other. They are the different selves that must break at such moments all connection with the different centers of our organic machine in order to then immerse yourself in the molecular world. In the 5th 87 chapter 22 the talk, it is urgent, cannot be postponed, to observe the inner chatter in the precise place where it comes from. Unquestionably, wrong inner chatter is the cause of many inharmonious and unpleasant psychic states in the present and also in the future. Obviously this vain and substantial chatter of ambiguous talk and in general all harmful, absurd talk, manifested in the outside world, has its origin in the wrong internal conversation. It is known that the esoteric practice of inner silence exists in Gnosis. Our disciples of Third Chamber know this. It is worth saying with complete clarity that inner silence must refer specifically to something very precise and defined. When the thinking process is intentionally exhausted during deep inner meditation, inner silence is achieved. But this is not what we want to explain in this chapter. Emptying the mind or blanket to really achieve inner silence is not what we are trying to explain now in these paragraphs. Practicing the inner silence that we are referring to does not mean preventing something from penetrating the mind either. 88. We are really talking right now about a very different type of inner silence. This is not something general vague. We want to practice inner silence in relation to something that is already in our mind, person, event, our own or someone else's matter, what we were told, what so and so did, etc. But without touching it with our inner tongue, without intimate discourse. Learning to be silent not only with the external language, but also with the secret, internal language, is extraordinary, wonderful. Many are silent on the outside, but with their inner tongue they skin their neighbor alive. Poisonous and malevolent inner chatter produces inner confusion. If you look at the wrong inner talk, you will see that it is made up of half-truths, or truths that relate to each other in a more or less incorrect way, or something that was added or omitted. Unfortunately, our emotional life is based exclusively on self-sympathy. To make matters worse, we only sympathize with ourselves, with our beloved ego, and we feel antipathy and even hatred towards those who do not sympathize with us. We love ourselves too much. We are 100% narcissists. This is irrefutable. As long as we continue bottled up in self-sympathy, any development of the being becomes more than impossible. 89. We need to learn to see other people's point of view. It is urgent to know how to put ourselves in the position of others. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do so to them. Matthew 7:12. What really counts in these studies is the way men behave internally and invisibly with each other. Unfortunately, and although we are very polite, even sincere at times, there is no doubt that invisibly and internally we treat each other very badly. Apparently very kind people daily drag their fellow men into the secret cave of themselves, to do with them whatever they want. Vexations, mockery, ridicule, etc. 90. Chapter the 23rd. The world of relations. The world of relationships has three very different aspects that we need to clarify precisely. First, we are related to the planetary body. That is, with the physical body. Second, we live on planet Earth, and by logical sequence we are related to the outside world and to the issues that concern us: family, business, money, issues of work, profession, politics, etc. 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 Third, the relationship of man with himself. For most people this type of relationship does not have the slightest importance. Unfortunately, people are only interested in the first two types of relationships, looking with absolute indifference to the third type. Food, health, money, business, really constitute the main concerns of the intellectual animal mistakenly called man. Now, it is evident that both the physical body and the affairs of the world are external to ourselves. The planetary body, physical body, is sometimes sick, sometimes healthy, and so on. We always believe we have some knowledge of our physical body, but in reality not even the best scientists 91 of the world know a lot about the body of flesh and blood. There is no doubt that the physical body, given its tremendous and complicated organization, is certainly far beyond our understanding. Regarding the second type of relationships, we are always victims of circumstances. It is unfortunate that we have not yet learned to consciously originate circumstances. There are many people incapable of adapting to anything or anyone or being truly successful in life. When thinking about ourselves from the angle of Gnostic esoteric work, it becomes urgent to find out which of these three types of relationships we are missing. The specific case may happen that we are wrongly related to the physical body and as a result we are sick. It may happen that we are poorly related to the outside world and as a result we have conflicts, economic and social problems, etc. 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 We may be poorly related to ourselves and sequentially suffer a lot from lack of inner illumination. Obviously, if the lamp in our bedroom is not connected to the electrical installation, our room will be in darkness. Those who suffer from lack of inner illumination must connect their minds with the higher centers of their being. 92. Unquestionably, we need to establish correct relationships not only with our planetary body, physical body, and with the outside world, but also with each of the parts of our own being. Pessimistic patients, tired of so many doctors and medicines, no longer want to be cured, and optimistic patients fight to live. In the Monte Carlo casino, many millionaires who lost their fortune in gambling committed suicide. Millions of poor mothers work to support their children. There are countless depressed aspirants who, due to lack of psychic powers and intimate illumination, have renounced esoteric work on themselves. There are few who know how to take advantage of adversity. In times of rigorous temptation, dejection of desolation, one must appeal to the intimate remembrance of oneself. In the depths of each of us is the Aztec Tonantzin, the Stella Maris, the Egyptian Isis, God the Mother, waiting for us to heal our aching hearts. When one gives oneself the shock of self-remembering, a miraculous change actually occurs in the entire work of the body, so that the cells receive a different food. 93. Chapter the 24th. The song Psychological. That time has come to reflect very seriously on what is called internal consideration. There is no doubt about the disastrous aspect of intimate self-consideration. This, in addition to hypnotizing consciousness, makes us lose a lot of energy. If one did not make the mistake of identifying so much with oneself, inner self-consideration would be more than impossible. When you identify with yourself, you love yourself too much, you feel sorry for yourself, you consider yourself, you think that you have always behaved very well with so-and-so, with your wife, with your children, etc. And that no one has been able to appreciate it, etc. He is a saint and all the rest are one of the most common forms of intimate self-regard is concern about what others may think about oneself. Maybe they assume that we are not honest, sincere, truthful, brave, etc. The most curious thing about all this is that we unfortunately ignore the enormous loss of energy that this type of worry brings us. Many hostile attitudes towards certain people who have done us no harm is due precisely to such concerns born of intimate self-regard. In these circumstances, loving oneself so much, considering oneself in this way, it is clear that the self or 94 better, let's say, the egos, instead of being extinguished, were then frighteningly fortified. Identified with oneself, one feels very sorry for one's own situation and even begins to do the math. This is how he thinks that so-and-so, that the compadre, that the comadre, that the neighbor, that the boss, that the friend, etc. 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 have not paid him properly despite all its well-known benefits, and bottled up in this it becomes unbearable and boring for everyone. With a guy like that, you practically can't talk because any conversation is sure to end up in his account book and his much vaunted sufferings. It is written that in Gnostic esoteric work, spiritual growth is only possible through forgiveness of others. If someone lives from moment to moment, suffering for what they owe them, for what they did to them, for the bitterness they caused them, always with the same song, nothing will be able to grow inside them. The Lord's Prayer has said, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." The feeling that one is owed, the pain for the evils that others caused, etc. stops all internal progress of the soul. Jesus the Great Kabir said, "Come to an agreement with your adversary quickly, while you are with him on the way, lest the adversary hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the judge 95 sheriff, and be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will not get out of there until you pay the last quadrant." Matthew, v. 25:26. If they owe us, we owe. If we demand to be paid up to the last denarius, we must first pay up to the last quadrant. This is the law of talion, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Vicious circle, absurd. The apologies, the full satisfaction and humiliations that we demand from others for the evils they caused us, are also demanded from us even if we consider ourselves meek sheep. Placing oneself under unnecessary laws is absurd. It is better to place oneself under new influences. The law of mercy is a higher influence than the law of the violent man. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It is urgent, indispensable, cannot be postponed, to intelligently place ourselves under the wonderful influences of Gnostic esoteric work, to forget that they owe us and to eliminate any form of self-consideration in our psyche. We must never admit within ourselves feelings of revenge, resentment, negative emotions, anxieties about the evils that were caused to us, violence, envy, incessant reminders of debts, etc. 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 Gnosis is intended for those sincere aspirants who truly want to work and change. 96. If we observe people, we can see directly that each person has their own song. Everyone sings their own psychological song. I want to refer emphatically to the question of psychological accounts, feeling that one is owed, complaining, considering oneself, etc. Sometimes people sing their song, just for the sake of it, without being given any wind up, without being encouraged, and on other occasions after a few glasses of wine, we say that our boring song must be eliminated. This incapacitates us internally, it steals a lot of energy from us. In matters of revolutionary psychology, someone who sings too well, we are not referring to the beautiful voice, nor to the physical singing, certainly cannot go beyond himself, remains in the past. A person hindered by sad songs cannot change his level of being, cannot go beyond what is. To move to a higher level of being, it is necessary to stop being what one is. We need not to be what we are. If we continue to be what we are, we will never be able to move to a higher level of being. In the realm of practical life, unusual things happen. Very often a random person becomes friends with another, just because it is easy for him to sing a song. Unfortunately, such relationships end when a singer is asked to shut up, change the record, talk about something else, etc. 97. Then the resentful singer goes in search of a new friend, someone who is willing to listen to him indefinitely. The singer demands understanding, someone who understands him, as if it were so easy to understand another person. To understand another person, you must understand yourself. Unfortunately, the good singer thinks he understands himself. There are many disappointed singers who sing the song of not being understood and dream of a wonderful world where they are the central figures. However, not all singers are public, there are also reserved ones. They do not sing their song directly, but secretly they sing it. They are people who have worked a lot, who have suffered too much, they feel disappointed, they think that life owes them everything they were never able to owe. They usually feel an inner sadness, a sensation of monotony and dreadful boredom, intimate tiredness or frustration around which thoughts piled up. Unquestionably, secret songs block our way on the path of intimate self-realization of the being. Unfortunately, such secret inner songs go unnoticed by themselves unless we intentionally observe them. 98. Obviously, all self-observation allows the light to penetrate into unself, into one's intimate depths. No inner change could occur in our psyche unless brought to the light of self-observation. It is essential to observe yourself when alone, in the same way as when being in relationship with people. When one is alone, very different eyes, very different thoughts, negative emotions, etc. arise. You are not always in good company when you are alone. It is hardly normal, it is very natural, to be in very bad company in complete solitude. The most negative and dangerous eyes occur when you are alone. If we want to radically transform ourselves, we need to sacrifice our own sufferings. Many times we express our sufferings in articulate or inarticulate songs. 99. Chapter the 25th. Return and Recurrence. A. Man is what his life is. If a man does not modify anything within himself, if he does not radically transform his life, if he does not work on himself, he is wasting his time miserably. Death is the return to the very beginning of your life with the possibility of repeating it again. Much has been said in pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occult literature on the subject of successive lives. It is better that we deal with successive X's. The life of each one of us with all its times is always the same, repeating itself from existence to existence, through countless centuries. Unquestionably, we continue in the seed of our descendants. This is something that has already been demonstrated. The life of each one of us in particular is a living film that we take with us to eternity when we die. Each one of us takes his film and brings it back to project it again on the screen of a new existence. The repetition of dramas, comedies and tragedies is a fundamental axiom of the law of recurrence. In each new existence the same circumstances are always repeated. The actors of such scenes, always repeated, are those people who live within us, the eyes. 100. If we disintegrate those actors, those eyes that originate the always repeated scenes of our lives, then the repetition of such circumstances would become more than impossible. Obviously, without actors there can be no scenes. This is something irrefutable. This is how we can free ourselves from the laws of return and recurrence, so we can become truly free. Obviously, each of the characters, eyes, that we carry within us, repeats its same role from existence to existence. If we disintegrate it, if the actor dies, the role ends. By seriously reflecting on the law of recurrence or repetition of scenes in each return, we discover, through intimate self-observation, the secret springs of this question. If in the past existence at the age of 25 years, we had a love affair, it is undoubtable that the I had such a commitment would look for the lady of his dreams at 25 years of the new existence. If the lady in question was only 15 years old, then the I had such an adventure will look for her beloved in the new existence at the same exact age. It is clear to understand that the two eyes, both ascenders, search for each other telepathically and meet again to repeat the same love adventure of the past existence. 101. Two enemies who fought to the death in the past existence will seek each other again in the new existence to repeat their tragedy at the corresponding age. If two people had a dispute over real estate at the age of 40, 40 in the past existence. At the same age they will search for each other telepathically in the new existence to repeat the same thing. Within each of us, like many people, full of commitments. That is irrefutable. A thief carries within him a den of thieves with various criminal commitments. The murderer carries within himself a club of murderers, and the lustful carries in his psyche a whorehouse. The serious thing about all this is that the intellect ignores the existence of such people arise within itself and of such commitments that are fatally fulfilled. All these commitments of the eyes that dwell within us occur beneath our reason. They are facts that we ignore, things that happen to us, events that are processed in the subconscious and unconscious. We have been rightly told that everything happens to us, like when it rains or when it thunders. We really have the illusion of doing, but we do nothing, it happens to us. This is fatal, mechanical. Our personality is just the instrument of different people, eyes, through which each of those people, eyes, fulfills their commitments. 102. Many things happen below our cognitive capacity. Unfortunately, we ignore what happens below our poor reason. We think we are wise when in truth we don't even know that we don't know. We are miserable logs, swept away by the raging waves of the sea of existence. Getting out of this misfortune, this unconsciousness, the lamentable state in which we find ourselves, is only possible by dying within ourselves. How could we wake up without previously dying? Only with death does the new come. If the germ does not die, the plant is not born. Whoever truly awakens thereby acquires full objectivity of their consciousness, authentic enlightenment, happiness. 103. Chapter the 26th Auto, Children's Consciousness. We have been told very wisely that we have 97% subconsciousness and 3% consciousness. Speaking frankly and without hesitation, we will say that 97% of the essence that we carry inside us is bottled, stuffed, inside each of the eyes that together constitute the myself. Obviously the essence or consciousness trapped between each self is processed by virtue of its own conditioning. Any disintegrated self releases a certain percentage of consciousness. The emancipation or liberation of the essence or consciousness would be impossible without the disintegration of each self. The greater the number of disintegrated selves, the greater self-awareness. The smaller the number of disintegrated selves, the lower the percentage of awakened consciousness. The awakening of consciousness is only possible by dissolving the self, dying in unself, here and now. Unquestionably, as long as the essence or consciousness is embedded between each of the selves that we carry within us, it is asleep, in a subconscious state. It is urgent to transform the subconscious into conscious, and this is only possible by annihilating the eyes, dying in themselves. 104. It is not possible to awaken without having previously died in unself. Those who try to awaken first and then die, do not have real experience of what they affirm. They march resolutely along the path of error. Newborn children are wonderful. They enjoy full self-awareness. They are fully awake. Within the body of the newborn child the essence is reincorporated, and that gives the creature its beauty. We do not want to say that 100% of the essence or consciousness is reincorporated in the newborn, but the free 3% that is not normally involved between the eyes. However, that percentage of free essence reincorporated within the organism of newborn children gives them full self-awareness, lucidity, etc. Adults look at the newborn with pity. They think that the creature is unconscious, but they are sadly wrong. The newborn sees the adult as he or she really is, unconscious, cruel, perverse, etc. The egos of the newborn come and go. They circle around the cradle. They would like to get into the new body, but because the newborn has not yet created the personality, any attempt by the egos to enter the new body results something more than impossible. Sometimes the creatures are scared when they see those ghosts or selves that approach their crib, and then they scream. 105. They cry, but adults do not understand this and assume that the child is sick or hungry or thirsty. Such is the unconsciousness of adults. As the new personality is formed, the selves that come from previous existences gradually penetrate the new body. When the totality of the egos is reintegrated, we appear in the world with that horrible inner ugliness that characterizes us. So, we walk like sleepwalkers everywhere. Always unconscious, always perverse. When we die, 3 things go to the grave. 1. The physical body. 2. The organic vital fund. 3. Personality. The vital fund, like a ghost, disintegrates little by little. In front of the tomb as the physical body also disintegrates. The personality is subconscious or infraconscious. It enters and leaves the tomb whenever it wants. It is happy when the mourners bring it flowers. It loves its relatives, and it dissolves very slowly until it becomes cosmic dust. That which continues beyond the grave is the ego, the pluralized self, the myself, a bunch of devils within which the essence, the consciousness, is trapped, which in its time and hour returns, reintegrates. It is unfortunate that when the child's new personality is created, the eyes are also reincorporated. 106 Chapter the 27th The Publican and the Pharisee. Reflecting a little on the various circumstances of life, it is well worth seriously understanding the foundations on which we rest. One person rests on his position, another on money, another on prestige, another on his past, another on this or the title, etc. 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 The most curious thing is that everyone, whether rich or mendicant, needs everyone and lives off everyone, even if we are inflated with pride and vanity. Let's think for a moment about what they can take from us. What would be our fate in a revolution of blood and liquor? What would be the foundations on which we rest? There are some of us, we believe we are very strong and we are frighteningly weak. The eye that feels in itself the basis on which we rest must be dissolved if we really long for authentic bliss. Such an eye underestimates people, feels better than everyone, more perfect in everything, richer, more intelligent, more expert in life, etc. It is very appropriate now to quote the parable of Jesus the Great Kabir, about the two men who prayed. It was spoken to some who trusted in themselves as righteous, and despised others. Jesus the Christ said, "Two men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee, standing, prayed with himself in this way. 107 God, I thank you because I am not like other men, thieves, unjust, adulterers, nor even like this publican. I fast twice a week, I tithe everything I earn." But the publican, being far away, did not even want to raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his chest saying, "God be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell that this one went down to his house justified before the other. For anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Luke 18, 10-14. Beginning to realize our own nothingness and misery in which we find ourselves is absolutely impossible as long as the concept of more exists in us. Examples: I am more just than that one, wiser than so and so, more virtuous than so and so, richer, more expert in the things of life, more chaste, more compliant with his duties, etc. 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 It is not possible to pass through the eye of a needle as long as we are rich, as long as that more complex exists in us. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. That your school is the best and that my neighbor's is no good. That your religion is the only true one, so and so's wife is a terrible wife and that mine is a saint. That my friend Roberto is a drunk and that I am a very judicious and abstemious man, etc. 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 is what makes us feel rich, which is why we are all the camels of the biblical parable in relation to esoteric work. 108 It is urgent to observe ourselves from moment to moment in order to clearly know the foundations on which it rests. When you discover what offends you the most at a given moment, the annoyance they gave him for this or the thing, then discover the basis on which it rests psychologically. Such bases constitute, according to the Christian gospel, the sands on which he built his house. It is necessary to carefully note how and when he despised others, feeling superior perhaps due to title or social position or experience acquired or money, etc. 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 It is serious to feel rich, superior to so and so or so and so for this or that reason. People like that cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. It is good to discover how one feels flattered, how one's vanity is satisfied. This will show us the foundations on which we stand. However, such kind of observation should not be a merely theoretical matter. We must be practical and carefully observe ourselves directly, from moment to moment. When one begins to understand one's own misery and nothingness, when he abandons delusions of grandeur, when he discovers the foolishness of so many titles, honors and vain superiorities over our fellow men, it is an unmistakable sign that he is already beginning to change. One cannot change if one closes oneself to that which says, "My house, my money. My properties, my job. 109 My virtues. My intellectual abilities, my artistic abilities, my knowledge, my prestige, etc. 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 That of clinging to mine to me is more than enough to prevent us from recognizing our own nothingness and inner misery. One is amazed at the spectacle of a fire or shipwreck. So desperate people often take possession of things that are funny, unimportant things. Poor people. They sit on those things, they rest on nonsense, they attach themselves to that which has not the slightest importance. To feel oneself through external things, to base oneself on them, is equivalent to being in a state of absolute unconsciousness. The feeling of beingness, the real being, is only possible by dissolving all those self that we carry within us. Before, such a feeling is more than impossible. Unfortunately, the worshippers of the I do not accept this. They believe they are gods. They think that they already possess those glorious bodies that Paul of Tarsus spoke of. They assume that the I is divine, and there is no one who can take such absurdities out of their heads. You don't know what to do with such people. You explain it to them and they don't understand. Always clinging to the sands on which they built their house. Always immersed in their dogmas, their whims, their foolishness. 110. If these people seriously observed themselves, they would verify for themselves the doctrine of the many. They would discover within themselves all that multiplicity of people arise that live within us. How could the real feeling of our true being exist in us, when those eyes are feeling for us, thinking for us? The most serious thing about this whole tragedy is that one thinks that one is thinking, one feels that one is feeling, when in reality it is someone else who at any given moment thinks with our martyred brain and feels with our aching heart. How many times we believe we are loving, and what happens is that another within ourselves full of lust uses the center of the heart. We are unfortunate, we confuse animal passion with love. And yet it is someone else within ourselves, within our personality, who goes through such confusions. We all thought that we would never utter those words of the Pharisee in the biblical parable. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, etc. 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 However, and although it may seem incredible, this is how we perceive daily. The meat seller in the market says, I am not like the other butchers who sell poor quality meat and exploit people. 111. The fabric seller in the store exclaims, I am not like other merchants who know how to steal by measuring and who have become rich. The milk seller states, I am not like other milk sellers who put water in it. I like to be honest. The lady of the house comments on a visit, the following. I am not like a whore who hangs out with other men. I am, thank God, a decent person and faithful to my husband. Conclusion. The others are evil, unjust, adulterers, thieves and perverse, and each of us is a meek sheep, a chocolate saint good to have as a golden child in some church. How foolish we are. We often think that we never do all those stupid things and perversities that we see others do, and for this reason we come to the conclusion that we are magnificent people. Unfortunately, we do not see the stupidities and mean things that we do. There are rare moments in life when the mind rests without worries of any kind. When the mind is still, when the mind is silent, then the new comes. In such moments it is possible to see the bases, the foundations, on which we rest. With the mind in deep rest afterwards, we can verify for ourselves the harsh reality of the sad of life, on which we build the house. See Matthew 7, verses 2, 4, 2, 5, 2, 6, 2, 7, 2, 8, 2, 9. Parable dealing with the two foundations. 112. Chapter the 28th. Well, that great work is above all, the creation of man for himself, based on conscious work and voluntary suffering. The great work is the inner conquest of ourselves, of our true freedom in God. We need with maximum urgency, which cannot be postponed, to disintegrate all those eyes that live within us if we really want the perfect emancipation of the will. Nicholas Flamel and Raimondo Lolio, both poor, freed their will and performed innumerable psychological prodigies that astound. Agrippa never reached more than the first part of the great work and died painfully, struggling in the disintegration of his eyes with the purpose of possessing himself and establishing his independence. The perfect emancipation of the will assures the wise man absolute empire over fire, air, water and earth. To many students of contemporary psychology, what we stated above in relation to the sovereign power of the emancipated will seem exaggerated. However, the Bible tells us wonders about Moses. According to Philo, Moses was an initiate in the land of the pharaohs on the banks of the Nile, priest of Osiris, cousin of the pharaoh, educated among the columns of Isis, the 113 Divine Mother, and Osiris our father who is in secret. Moses was a descendant of patriarch Abraham, the great Chaldean magician, and of the highly respectable Isaac. Moses, the man who released the electric power of the will, possesses the gift of wonders. The divine and humans know this. That's how it is written. Everything that the Holy Scriptures say about this Hebrew leader is certainly extraordinary, portentous. Moses transforms his staff into a snake, transforms one of his hands into a leper's hand, then brings him back to life. The test of the burning bushes made its power clear. People understand, they kneel and prostrate. Moses' use is a magic wand, emblem of the royal power, of the priestly power of the initiate in the great mysteries of life and death. Before Pharaoh, Moses changes the water of the Nile into blood, the fish die, the sacred river is infected, the Egyptians cannot drink from it, and the irrigation of the Nile spills blood across the fields. Moses does more. He manages to make millions of disproportionate, gigantic, monstrous frogs appear, which come out of the river and invade the houses. Then, under his gesture, indicator of a free and sovereign will, those horrible frogs disappear. More like Pharaoh does not let the Israelites free. Moses works new wonders. He covers the earth with dirt. 114. It raises clouds of disgusting and filthy flies, which it then has the luxury of pushing away. The terrible plague breaks out, and all the flocks except those of the Jews die. Taking soot from the smoke, the Holy Scriptures say, he throws it into the air and, falling on the Egyptians, it causes pustules and ulcers. Extending his famous magic staff, Moses rains hail from the sky that mercilessly destroys and kills. Then he explodes the flaming lightning, the terrifying thunder rumbles and it rains frighteningly, then with a gesture he restores calm. However, Pharaoh remains adamant. Moses, with a tremendous blow of his magic wand, makes clouds of locusts appear as if by magic, then darkness comes. Another blow with the cane and everything returns to the original order. The end of all the biblical drama of the Old Testament is well known. Jehovah intervenes, causes all the firstborn of the Egyptians to die and Pharaoh has no choice but to let the Hebrews go. Later, Moses uses his magic wand to split the waters of the Red Sea and cross them on dry foot. When the Egyptian warriors rush there pursuing the Israelites, Moses, with a gesture, causes the waters to close again, swallowing the pursuers. Unquestionably, many pseudo-occultists, upon reading all this, would like to do the same, to have the same powers as Moses. However, this is more than impossible as long as the will continues. 115. Bottled between each and every one of those eyes that we carry in the different backgrounds of our psyche. The essence embedded within the myself is the genie of Aladdin's lamp, longing for freedom. Free such a genie, he can perform prodigies. The essence is will consciousness, unfortunately being processed by virtue of our own conditioning. When the will is released, it then mixes or fuses, thus integrating with the universal will, thereby becoming sovereign. The individual will fused with the universal will can perform all the wonders of Moses. There are three types of acts. A. Those that correspond to the law of accidents. B. Those that belong to the law of recurrence, facts always repeated in each existence. C. Actions intentionally determined by the conscious will. Unquestionably, only people who have liberated their will through the death of the myself will be able to perform new acts born of their free will. The ordinary acts of humanity are always the result of the law of recurrence or the mere product of mechanical accidents. Whoever possesses truly free will can originate new circumstances. He who has his will bottled within the pluralized I is a victim of circumstances. 116. In all the biblical pages there is a wonderful display of high magic, clairvoyance, prophecy, prodigies, transfigurations, resurrection of the dead, either by insufflation or by the laying on of hands or by staring at the birth of the nose, etc. 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 The Bible abounds in massage, sacred oil, magnetic passes, the application of a little saliva on the sick part, reading other people's thoughts, transports, apparitions, words coming from heaven, etc. 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 True wonders of the liberated, emancipated, sovereign conscious will. Witches. Sorcerers. Black wizards. They abound like weeds. However, these are not saints, nor prophets, nor adepts of the White Brotherhood. No one could reach royal enlightenment, nor exercise the absolute priesthood of the conscious will, if he had not previously died radically in himself, here and now. Many people frequently write to us complaining about not having enlightenment, asking for powers, demanding keys from us that will turn them into magicians, etc. 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 But they are never interested in self-observation, in self-knowledge, in disintegrating those psychic aggregates. Those eyes within which the will, the essence, is trapped. People like this are obviously doomed to failure. They are people who covet the faculties of the saints, but who are in no way willing to die in themselves. 117. Eliminating errors is something magical, wonderful in itself, which involves rigorous psychological self-observation. Exercising powers is possible when the wonderful power of the will is radically released. Unfortunately, since people have their will trapped between each eye, it is obviously divided into multiple wills that are each processed by virtue of their own conditioning. It is clear to understand that each eye has, for this reason, its particular, unconscious will. The innumerable wills trapped between the eyes frequently collide with each other, making us, for this reason, impotent, weak, miserable, victims of circumstances, incapable. 118 Chapter the 29th The decapitation. As one works on oneself, one understands more and more the need to radically eliminate from one's inner nature everything that makes us so abominable. The worst circumstances in life, the most critical situations, the most difficult events, are always wonderful for intimate self-discovery. In those unexpected, critical moments, the most secret selves always emerge when we least think about it. If we are alert, we unquestionably discover ourselves. The quietest times of life are precisely the least favorable for working on oneself. There are moments in life that are too complicated when one has a marked tendency to easily identify with events and completely forget about oneself. In those moments one does stupid things that led to nothing. If you were alert, if in those same moments, instead of losing your mind, you remembered yourself, you would discover with amazement certainties of which you never had the slightest suspicion of their possible existence. Faced with the sense of intimate self-observation, each of the eyes that live inside us really assume this or that figure secretly related to the defect personified by it. Undoubtedly the image of each of these eyes has a certain flavor. 119 Unmistakable psychological through which we apprehend, capture, instinctively trap its intimate nature, and the defect that characterizes it. In principle, the esotericist does not know where to start, faced with the need to work on himself, but he is completely disoriented. Taking advantage of critical moments, the most unpleasant situations, the most adverse moments, if we are alert we will discover our outstanding defects, the selves that we must urgently disintegrate. Sometimes it can begin with anger or self-love, or with the unfortunate second of lust, etc. 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 It is necessary to take note, above all, of our daily psychological states, if we really want a definitive change. Before going to bed it is advisable that we examine the events that occurred that day, the embarrassing situations, the thunderous laughter of Aristophanes and the subtle smile of Socrates. We may have hurt someone with a laugh, we may have made someone sick with a smile or a misplaced look. Let us remember that in pure esotericism, good is everything that is in its place, bad is everything that is out of place. Water in its place is good, but if it flooded the house it would be out of place, it would cause damage, it would be bad and harmful. 120 The fire in the kitchen and inside its place, in addition to being useful, is good. Out of place by burning the furniture in the living room, it would be bad and harmful. Any virtue, no matter how holy, is good in its place. Out of place it is bad and harmful. With virtues we can harm others. It is essential to place the virtues in their corresponding place. What would you say about a priest who is preaching the word of the Lord inside a brothel? What would you say about a meek and tolerant man who was blessing a gang of assailants who were trying to rape his wife and daughters? What would you say about that kind of tolerance taken to excess? What would you think about the charitable attitude of a man who, instead of bringing food home, distributed the money among mendicants of vice? What would you think about the helpful man who at any given moment lent a dagger to a remember, dear reader, that crime is also hidden among the cadences of the verse. There is much virtue in the wicked and there is much evil in the virtuous. Although it may seem incredible, crime is also hidden within the same perfume of prayer. Crime disguises itself as a saint, uses the best virtues, presents itself as a martyr and even officiates in sacred temples. As the sense of intimate self-observation develops in us through continuous use, we will be able to see all those eyes that serve as the basic foundation of our individual temperament. 121 Whether the latter is sanguine or nervous, phlegmatic or bilious. Although you may not believe it, dear reader, behind the temperament we possess lies hidden among the most remote depths of our psyche, the most execrable diabolical creations. Seeing such creations, observing those monstrosities of hell within which our very consciousness is bottled, becomes possible with the ever-progressive development of the sense of intimate self-observation. As long as a man has not dissolved these creations of hell, these aberrations of himself, undoubtedly deep down, in the deepest depths, he will continue to be something that should not exist, a deformity, an abomination. The most serious thing about all this is that the abominable person does not realize his own abomination. He believes himself to be beautiful, just, a good person, and he even complains about the lack of understanding of others. He regrets the ingratitude of his fellow men. He says that he does not care. They understand, he cries, stating that they owe him, that they have paid him with black money. The sense of intimate self-observation allows us to verify for ourselves indirectly the secret work through which at a given time we are dissolving this or that self, this or that psychological defect, possibly discovered in difficult conditions and at least discovered. We suspected. Have you ever thought in your life about what you like or dislike most? Have you reflected 122 about the secret springs of action? Why do you want to have a beautiful house? Why do you want to have a latest model car? Why do you want to always be in the latest fashion? Why do you covet not to be covetous? What offended you the most at a given moment? What flattered you the most yesterday? Why did you feel superior to so-and-so at a certain moment? At what time did you feel superior to someone? Why did you become conceited when recounting your triumphs? Couldn't you keep quiet when they whispered about another known person? Did you receive the glass of liquor as a courtesy? Did you accept smoking, perhaps not having the habit, possibly out of the concept of education or manliness? Are you sure you were sincere in that conversation? And when you justify yourself, and when you praise yourself, and when you count your triumphs and relate them repeating what you previously said to others, did you understand the sense of intimate self-observation, in addition to allowing you to clearly see the self that you are dissolving, will also allow you to see the pathetic and defined results of your inner work? In principle, these creations of hell, these psychic aberrations that unfortunately characterize you, are uglier and more monstrous than the most horrendous beasts that exist at the bottom of the seas or in the deepest jungles of the earth. As you advance in your work, you can evidence through the sense of inner self-observation the outstanding fact that those abominations are losing volume. They are becoming smaller. 123. It is interesting to know that such bestialities, as they decrease in size, as they lose volume and become smaller, they gain in beauty, slowly assuming the childish figure. Finally they disintegrate, they become cosmic dust, then the trapped essence is released, emancipated, awakened. Undoubtedly the mind cannot fundamentally alter any psychological defect. Obviously understanding can afford to label a defect with this or that name, to justify it, to move it from one level to another, etc. But it could not by itself annihilate it, disintegrate it. We urgently need a flaming power superior to the mind, a power that is capable of itself to reduce this or that psychological defect to mere cosmic dust. Fortunately, there exists in us that serpentine power, that wonderful fire that the old medieval alchemists baptized with the mysterious name of Stella Maris, the Virgin of the Sea, the Azori of the Science of Hermes, the Tonantzin of Aztec Mexico, that elevation of our own being. Intimate, God the Mother within us, always symbolized with the sacred serpent of the great mysteries. If after having observed and deeply understood this or that psychological defect, this or that we beg our particular cosmic mother, since each one of us has our own, disintegrate, reduce to cosmic dust, this or that defect, that reason for our inner work, you can be 124 sure that it will lose volume and slowly pulverize. All this naturally implies successive background work, always continuous, since no self can ever be disintegrated instantly. The sense of intimate self-observation will be able to see the progressive advance of the work related to the abomination that we are truly interested in disintegrating. Stella Maris, although it may seem incredible, is the astral signature of human sexual power. Obviously Stella Maris has the effective power to disintegrate the aberrations that we carry within our psychological interior. The beheading of John the Baptist is something that invites us to reflect. No radical psychological change would be possible if we did not first go through the beheading. Our own derived being, Tonantzin, Stella Maris, is an electrical power unknown to all of humanity and that is latent in the very depths of our psyche, ostensibly enjoys the power that allows it to decapitate any self before final disintegration. Stella Maris is that philosophical fire that is latent in all organic and inorganic matter. Psychological impulses can provoke the intensive action of such fire and then decapitation becomes possible. Some egos are usually decapitated at the beginning of the psychological work, others in the middle and the last at the end. 125. Final. Stella Maris as a sexual fiery power is fully aware of the work to be done and carries out the decapitation at the right moment, As long as the disintegration of all these psychological abominations, all these lasciviousness, all these curses, theft, envy, secret or open adultery, ambition for money or psychic powers, etc., has not occurred, even when we believe ourselves to be honorable people, faithful to the word, sincere, courteous, charitable, beautiful on the inside, etc. Obviously we will not go beyond being more than whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside but inside full bookish erudition, pseudo-wisdom, complete information about the sacred scriptures, whether from the east or the west, from the north or the south, pseudo-occultism, pseudo-esotericism, the absolute security of being well documented, intransigent sectarianism with full conviction, etc. is of no use because in reality only what we ignore exists deep down, creations of hell, curses, monstrosities that hide behind the pretty face, behind the venerable face, under the most holy clothing of the sacred leader, etc. We have to be honest with ourselves. We ask what we want. If we have come to the teaching Gnostic out of mere curiosity, if it is really not going through decapitation that we are wishing for, then we are deceiving ourselves. We are 126 defending our own rottenness. We are proceeding hypocritically. In the most venerable schools of esoteric wisdom and occultism, there are many sincerely mistaken people who truly want to self-realize but who are not dedicated to the disintegration of their inner abominations. There are many people who assume that through good intentions it is possible to achieve sanctification. Obviously, as long as we do not work intensely on those egos that we carry within us, they will continue to exist under the background of a pious gaze and good behavior. The time has come to know that we are evil people disguised in the robe of holiness, sheep in wolf's clothing, cannibals dressed in knight's clothing, executioners hidden behind the sacred sign of the cross, etc. No matter how majestic we appear within our temples, or within our classrooms of light and harmony, no matter how serene and sweet our peers see us, no matter how reverent and humble we seem, in the depths of our psyche all the abominations of hell and all the monstrosities of wars. In revolutionary psychology, the need for a radical transformation becomes evident to us, and this is only possible by declaring a war to the death, merciless and cruel, to ourselves. 127. Certainly we are all worthless. Each one of us is the disgrace of the earth, the execrable. Fortunately, John the Baptist taught us the secret path: die in ourselves through psychological decapitation. 128. Chapter The Triplex, the center of permanent gravity. Without true individuality, it is impossible for there to be continuity of purposes. If the psychological individual does not exist, if in each of there are many people living in us, if there is no responsible person, it would be absurd to demand continuity of purpose from someone. We know well that many people live within a person, so the full sense of responsibility does not really exist in us. What a given I affirms at a given moment cannot have any seriousness due to the concrete fact that any other I can affirm exactly the opposite at any other moment. The serious thing about all this is that many people believe they have a sense of moral responsibility, and they deceive themselves by always claiming to be the same. There are people who at any moment of their existence come to Gnostic studies, shine with the strength of longing, become enthusiastic about esoteric work, and even swear to dedicate their entire existence to these questions. Unquestionably, all the brothers of our movement come to admire such an enthusiast. One cannot help but feel great joy in listening to people of this kind, so devout and definitely sincere. 129. However, the idol does not last long, any day, due to this or that reason, fair or unfair, simple or complicated. The person withdraws from Gnosis, then abandons work and to right the wrong, or trying to justify himself, joins some other mystical organization and thinks that things are better now. All this coming and going, all this incessant changing of schools, sects, religions, is due to the multiplicity of eyes that within us fight among themselves for their own supremacy. Since each eye has its own criteria, its own mind, its own ideas, this change of mind, this constant fluttering of organization, from ideal to ideal, etc., is hardly normal. The subject itself is nothing more than a machine that sometimes serves as a vehicle for oneself and another. Some mystical eyes deceive themselves. After abandoning this or that sect, they decide to believe themselves to be gods. They shine like will-o' the wisps and finally disappear. There are people who for a moment peek into esoteric work, and then the moment another self intervenes, they definitively abandon these studies and allow themselves to be swallowed up by life. Obviously, if one does not fight against life, it devours him, and there are rare applicants who truly do not allow themselves to be swallowed by life. Existing within us a whole multiplicity of these, the permanent center of gravity cannot exist. 130. It is hardly normal that not all subjects are intimately self-realizing. We know well that the intimate self-realization of the being requires continuity of purposes, and since it is very difficult to find someone who has a permanent center of gravity, then it is not strange that the person who reaches inner self-realization is very rare. Deep, the normal thing is that someone gets excited about esoteric work and then abandons it. The strange thing is that someone does not abandon work and reach the goal. Certainly, and in the name of truth, we affirm that the Sunday is doing a very complicated and terribly difficult laboratory experiment. Within the intellectual animal mistakenly called man, there are germs that, properly developed, can become solar men. However, it is worth clarifying that it is not safe for these germs to develop. The normal thing is that they degenerate and unfortunately lose. In any case, the aforementioned germs that will turn us into solar men need a suitable environment. Since it is well known that the seed does not germinate in a sterile environment, it is lost. In order for the real seed of man deposited in our sexual glands to germinate, continuity of purpose in the normal physical body are needed. If scientists continue testing the internal secretion glands, any possibility of development of the aforementioned germs may be lost. 131. Although it may seem incredible, ants already went through a similar process in the remote archaic past of our planet Earth. One is filled with amazement when contemplating the perfection of an ant palace. There is no doubt that the order established in any anthill is formidable. Those initiates who have awakened consciousness know through direct mystical experience that ants, in times that the greatest historians in the world do not even remotely suspect, were a human race that created a very powerful socialist civilization. Then they eliminated the dictators of that family, the various religious sects and free will, since all of this took away their power and they needed to be totalitarian in the most complete sense of the word. Under these conditions, with individual initiative and religious right eliminated, the intellectual animal rushed down the path of involution and degeneration. To all of the above, scientific experiments were added. Transplants of organs, glands, trials with hormones, etc. 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 The result of which was the gradual shrinking and morphological alteration of those human organisms until they finally became the ants we know. All that civilization, all those movements related to the established social order became mechanical and were inherited from father to son. Today one is filled with sadness when seeing an anthill, but we cannot help but regret its lack of intelligence. 132. If we do not work on ourselves, we devolve and degenerate frighteningly. The experiment that the Sunday is doing in nature's laboratory, certainly in addition to being difficult, has given very few results. Creating solar men is only possible when there is true cooperation in each of us. The creation of the solar man is not possible if we do not first establish a permanent center of gravity within ourselves. How could we have continuity of purpose if we do not establish the center of gravity in our psyche? Any race created by the Sunday certainly has no other objective in nature than to serve the interests of this creation and the solar experiment. If the Sunday fails in its experiment, it loses all interest in such a race and it is in fact condemned to destruction and involution. Each of the races that have existed on the face of the earth has served for the solar experiment. From each race the Sunday has achieved some triumphs, harvesting small groups of solar men. When a race is born its fruits, it progressively disappears or perishes violently through great catastrophes. The creation of solar men is possible when one strives to become independent from the lunar forces. There is no doubt that all these selves that we carry in our psyche are exclusively lunar. 133. It would in no way be impossible to free ourselves from the lunar force if we did not previously establish within ourselves a permanent center of gravity. How could we dissolve the totality of the pluralized self if we do not have continuity of purpose? How could we have continuity of purpose without having previously established a permanent center of gravity in our psyche? Since the current race, instead of becoming independent from lunar influence, has lost all interest in solar intelligence, it has unquestionably condemned itself towards involution and degeneration. It is not possible for true man to emerge through evolutionary mechanics. We well know that evolution and its twin sister, involution, are just two laws that constitute the mechanical axis of all nature. It evolves up to a certain perfectly defined point and then comes the involutional process. Every rise is followed by a fall and vice versa. We are exclusively machines controlled by different eyes. We serve the economy of nature. We do not have a defined individuality as many pseudo-esotericists and pseudo-occultists mistakenly assume. We need to change with utmost urgency so that the germs of man bear fruit. Only by working on ourselves with true continuity of purpose and complete sense of moral responsibility can we become 134. Solar menace implies dedicating the entirety of our existence to esoteric work on ourselves. Those who hope to reach the solar state through the mechanics of evolution deceive themselves and doom themselves in effect to involutionary degeneration. In esoteric work we do not have the luxury of versatility. Those who have rather vain ideas, those who today work on their psyche and tomorrow allow themselves to be swallowed by life, those who look for evasion, justifications, to abandon esoteric work will degenerate and evolve. Some postpone the error, leave everything for tomorrow while they improve their economic situation, without taking into account that the solar experiment is something very different from their personal criteria and their well-known projects. It is not so easy to become a solar man when we carry the moon inside us. The ego is lunar. The earth has two moons. The second of these is called Lilith and is a little more distant than the white moon. Astronomers usually see Lilith as a lentil because it is very small in size. That is the black moon. The most sinister forces of the ego come to earth from Lilith and produce subhuman and bestial psychological results. The crimes of the Red Press, the most monstrous murders in history, the most unsuspected crimes, etc., 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 are due to the vibratory waves of Lilith. 135. The double loner influence represented in the human being through the ego that he carries inside makes us a true failure. If we do not see the urgency of giving the entirety of our existence to work on ourselves with the purpose of freeing ourselves from the double loner force, we will end up swallowed by the moon, devolving, degenerating more and more within certain states that we could well describe of unconscious and infraconscious. The serious thing about all this is that we do not possess true individuality. If we had a permanent center of gravity, we would work really seriously until we achieve the solar state. There are so many excuses in these questions, there are so many evasions, there are so many fascinating attractions, that in fact it often becomes almost impossible to understand the urgency of esoteric work. However, the small margin we have of free will in the Gnostic teaching oriented towards practical work could serve as a foundation for our noble purposes related to the solar experiment. The weather-thin mind does not understand what we are saying here. It reads this chapter and later forgets it. Then comes another book and another, and in the end we conclude by joining any institution that sells us a passport to heaven, that speaks to us in a more optimistic way, that assures us comforts in the afterlife. 136. That's how people are, mere puppets controlled by invisible strings, mechanical dolls with weather, beating ideas and no continuity of purpose. 137. Chapters to the word Gnostic esoteric. It is urgent to study Gnosis and use the practical ideas that we give in this work to work seriously on yourself. However, we could not work on ourselves with the intention of dissolving this or that I without having previously observed it. Self-observation allows a ray of light to penetrate inside us. Any I is expressed in the head in one way, in the heart in another way, and in sex in another way. We need to observe the I that at a given moment we find trapped. It is urgent to see it in each of these three centers of our organism. In relation to other people, if we are alert and vigilant like the lookout in times of war, we discover ourselves. Do you remember at what time your vanity was hurt? Your pride? What upset you the most that day? Why did you have that upset? What was your secret cause? Study this, observe your head, heart and sex. Practical life is a wonderful school. In the interrelation we can discover those eyes that we carry inside us. Any setback, any incident, can lead us through intimate self-observation, to the 138 discovery of an I, whether it be self-love, envy, jealousy, anger, greed, suspicion, slander, lust, etc., etc., etc. We need to know ourselves before we can know others. It is urgent to learn to see someone else's point of view. If we put ourselves in the place of others, we discover that the psychological defects that we blame on others, we have plenty of within us. Loving one's neighbor is essential, but one could not love others if one does not first learn to put oneself in another person's position in esoteric work. Cruelty will continue to exist on the face of the earth, as long as we have not learned to put ourselves in the shoes of others. But if one does not have the courage to see oneself, how could one put oneself in the place of others? Why should we only see the bad side of other people? The mechanical antipathy towards another person whom we meet for the first time indicates that we do not know how to put ourselves in the place of our neighbor, that we do not love our neighbor, that our conscience is too asleep. Do we dislike a certain person? For what reason? Maybe he drinks. Let's observe ourselves. Are we sure of our virtue? Are we sure that we do not carry within us the eye of drunkenness? 139. It would be better if, when we saw a drunk doing attics, we said, "This is me, what attics I am doing." You are an honest and virtuous woman, and that is why you dislike a certain lady. He feels dislike for her. Why? Do you feel very sure of yourself? Do you believe that within you do not have the eye of lust? Do you think that that lady discredited by her scandals and lasciviousness is perverse? Are you sure that inside you does not exist the lasciviousness and perversity that you see in that woman? It would be better for him to observe himself intimately and in deep meditation to take the place of that woman whom he hates. It is urgent to value Gnostic esoteric work. It is essential to understand and appreciate it if we really long for radical change. It is essential to know how to love our fellow human beings, study Gnosis and bring this teaching to all people, otherwise we will fall into selfishness. If one dedicates oneself to esoteric work on oneself, but does not teach others, one's intimate progress becomes very difficult due to lack of love for one's neighbor. He who gives, receives, and the more he gives, the more he will receive, but from him who gives nothing, even what he has will be taken away. That is the law. 140 chapters. Prayer and the job. Observation, judgment and execution are the three basic factors of dissolution. First, it is observed. Second, it is prosecuted. Third, it is executed. Spies in war are first observed. Second, they are prosecuted. Third, they are shot. In the interrelation there is self-discovery and self-revelation. Whoever renounces coexistence with his peers also renounces self-discovery. Any incident in life, no matter how insignificant it may seem, undoubtedly has as its cause an intimate actor in us, a psychic aggregate, an I. Self-discovery is possible when we are in a state of perception alert, novelty alert. I, discovered red-handed, must be carefully observed in our brain, heart and sex. Any ego of lust could manifest itself in the heart as love, in the brain as an ideal, but when we pay attention to sex, we would feel a certain unmistakable morbid excitement. The judgment of any self must be definitive. We need to put him in the dock and judge him mercilessly. Any evasion, justification, consideration, must be eliminated, if we really want to do it. 141 Conscious of the I that we long to excise from our psyche. Execution is different. It would not be possible to execute any I without having previously observed and judged him. Prayer and psychological work is essential for dissolution. We need a power superior to the mind, if we really want to disintegrate this or that I. The mind by itself could never disintegrate any I, this is irrefutable. Praying is talking with God. We must appeal to God the Mother in our intimacy, if we truly want to disintegrate I's. Whoever does not love his mother, the ungrateful son, will fail in working on himself. Each one of us has our particular, individual Divine Mother. She in herself is a part of our own being, but derived. All ancient peoples worshipped God the Mother in the depths of our being. The feminine principle of the eternal is Isis, Mary, Tonantzin, Cybele, Rhea, Adona, Inzaburda, etc. 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 If in the merely physical we have Father and Mother, in the depths of our being we also have our Father who is in secret and our Divine Mother Kundalini. There are as many fathers in heaven as there are men on earth. God the Mother in our own intimacy is the feminine aspect of our Father that is in secret. 142 He and she are certainly the two higher parts of our intimate being. Undoubtedly he and she are our own real being beyond the I of psychology. He unfolds himself in her and commands, directs, instructs. She eliminates the undesirable elements that we carry inside us, on condition of continuous work on ourselves. When we have died radically, when all the undesirable elements have been eliminated after much conscious work and voluntary suffering, we will merge and integrate with the Father, Mother, then we will be terribly divine gods, beyond good and evil. Our particular, individual Divine Mother, through her flaming powers, can reduce to cosmic dust any of those many I's that have been previously observed and judged. In no way would a specific formula be necessary to pray to our inner Divine Mother. We must be very natural and simple when addressing her. The child who addresses his mother never has special formulas, he says what comes from his heart and that no I dissolves instantly. Our Divine Mother must work and even suffer a lot before achieving an annihilation of any I. Become introverted, direct your prayer inward, searching within your interior for your Divine Lady and with sincere supplications you can speak to her. 143 Ask him to disintegrate that I that you have previously observed and judged. The sense of intimate self-observation, as it develops, will allow you to verify the progressive progress of your work. Understanding and discernment are fundamental, however something more is needed if we really want to disintegrate the self. The mind can afford to label any defect, move it from one department to another, display it, hide it, etc. But it could never fundamentally alter it. It takes a special power superior to the mind, a flaming power capable of reducing any defect to ashes. Stella Maris, our Divine Mother, has that power. She can pulverize any psychological defect. Our Divine Mother lives in our intimacy, beyond the body, affections and mind. It is itself a fiery power superior to the mind. Our particular, individual cosmic mother possesses wisdom, love and power. Absolute perfection exists in it. Good intentions and the constant repetition of them are of no use, they led to nothing. It would be useless to repeat, I will not be lustful. The eyes of lasciviousness will continue to exist in the very depths of our psyche. 144 It would be useless to repeat daily, I will have no more anger. The eyes of anger would continue to exist in our psychological depths. It would be useless to say daily, I will no longer be greedy. The eyes of greed would continue to exist in the various backgrounds of our psyche. It would be of no use to separate ourselves from the world and lock ourselves up in a convent or live in some cave. The eyes within us, they would continue to exist. Some cave anchorites, based on rigorous disciplines, reached the ecstasy of the saints and were taken to the heavens, where they saw and heard things that human beings cannot understand. However, the eyes continued to exist within them. Unquestionably, the essence can escape from the eye through rigorous disciplines and enjoy ecstasy. However, after the bliss, it returns to the interior of them myself. Those who have become accustomed to ecstasy, without having dissolved the ego, believe that they have already achieved liberation. They deceive themselves into believing themselves to be masters and even enter the submerged involution. We would never speak out against mystical rapture, against the ecstasy and happiness of the soul in the absence of the ego. We only want to emphasize the need to dissolve eyes to achieve final liberation. The essence of any disciplined anchorite, accustomed to escaping from the eye, repeats such a feat. 145. After the death of the physical body, it enjoys ecstasy for a time and then returns like the genie in Aladdin's lamp to the inside of the bottle, to the ego, to myself. Then he has no choice but to return to a new physical body, with the purpose of repeating his life on the mat of existence. Many mystics who disincarnated in the caves of the Himalayas in Central Asia are now vulgar, ordinary people in this world, even though their followers still worship and venerate them. Any attempt at liberation, no matter how great it may be, if it does not take into account the need to dissolve the ego, is doomed to failure.